Chapter 193. Meeting Su Xue's gaze. Jinwan withdrew the smile on her face and placed her phone in her pocket. She calmly glanced at her. You didn't go with them to the club to play? I did. But I came back because there was nothing interesting. Su Xue finally raised an exquisite box in her hands. Earlier, I bought a lot of desserts outside T University. Let's eat together. Jinwan nodded and entered the dormitory. Without Ling Feifei, the dormitory was much quieter. Su Xue opened the dessert box and distributed the desserts to them. She then naturally sat by Jinwan's bedside and ate the mousse cake in her hands as she tried to find topics to chat with Jinwan. Most of the topics revolved around Jinwan. One moment, she asked Jinwan why she opened a studio related to real estate. The next moment, she asked Jinwan what her family did aside from opening a studio. The next moment, she asked Jinwan why she wanted to study business management. Finally, she casually asked, Jinwan, who were you talking to on the phone earlier? You were smiling so brightly. The person on the other side of the phone definitely wasn't your parents. It must be your boyfriend or something, right? Jinwan continued to hold the unfinished notes in her hands. As she read, she calmly said, After asking so many questions, are you more curious about me or my so-called boyfriend? As she spoke, Jinwan's gaze shifted to Su Xue's face. Jinwan's face carried a smile, but it also carried an unfathomable sense of distance. Su Xue blinked. Since there's nothing to do, I'm just casually chatting. I have a cousin whom I've been close to since I was young. She's the same age as you. Perhaps it's because of this that I instinctively feel closer to you. Jinwan raised her brows. Cousin? Su Xue nodded, but did not continue on the topic of her so-called cousin. She only said, Also look, we've all introduced ourselves. Ling Feifei couldn't hide anything, and Bai Wei's company can be easily found online. You're the only one who said that you opened a studio in High City, and didn't say anything else. I'm indeed very curious about you. Hearing these words, Bai Wei finally glanced at Jinwan. I indeed only have a studio. My background is simple and clean. There's nothing to be curious about. Jinwan's tone was indifferent. She then glanced at Su Xue. Speaking of which, aren't you, the young lady of the Swan group who specially came from America, more worthy of my curiosity? Su Xue immediately smiled bashfully. I'm not that different from you guys. I just live a little further. Only, Jinwan raised her brows. It seems like we're all the same. I live a little further. Jinwan, I just want to get to know you better. I don't have many friends in the country, so I ask too many questions. Don't always keep me at a distance. Jinwan did not speak. Bai Wei suddenly spoke up. Everyone's personality is different. Jinwan clearly doesn't wish to say more, yet you keep asking. Why can't you see this clearly? Su Xue's expression faltered. She thought for a moment, and suddenly handed a few desserts to Jinwan. All right, I won't ask anymore. I'll go read too. She stood up and returned to her own bed. Jinwan glanced at the desserts Su Xue placed by her bed. She casually picked them up and handed them to Bai Wei. You eat them. Recently, I've lost interest in desserts. My stomach feels uncomfortable after just a few mouthfuls. I keep feeling nauseous. Bai Wei glanced at her and teased. What's there to feel nauseous about? Don't tell me you're pregnant. They didn't know each other very well, so her casual words were just a joke. Jinwan just smiled at it. Su Xue's gaze abruptly shifted to Jinwan. Sensing her gaze, Jinwan could not help but turn to look at her. Don't you want to read? Su Xue paused. Her gaze shifted to her stomach. She picked up the book and asked thoughtfully, Do you feel nauseous when you eat desserts? I'm joking. Jinwan curved her lips and did not pay her any more attention. Half a month passed by quickly. Jinwan had almost forgotten about her birthday. By the time she remembered, it was T University's annual bonfire party. The bonfire party was the day before her birthday. It was also the day Jinwan had originally planned to book a plane ticket back to High City. It was said that not all students had the right to attend. Only students who had been selected by the professors and the school officials could attend the celebration. Jinwan was preparing to book a plane ticket back to High City when she suddenly received a call from Professor Lin. Professor Lin said that among the new students under him, There were only 10 spots left for the bonfire party. One of them was her. He also said that this spot was difficult to obtain. Once it was confirmed, it could not be changed. Jinwon could only agree. But this way, she would not be able to return to High City on her birthday. She had originally promised Mo Jingshan, but now that she had changed her mind, she did not know if he would be angered by her. Jinwon held her phone in a daze for a moment before calling Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan picked up the call and heard the woman stammering on the other end. What are you feeling so guilty about? Can't you even have a proper conversation? Jinwon could only speak honestly. Earlier, I received a call from Professor Lin. He arranged a spot for me for T University's annual bonfire party. Since I've already arranged it, I can't go. So I can't return to High City on Saturday. You're not returning to High City this week? Mo Jingshan was in his office, flipping through the documents without raising his head. He spoke calmly into his phone. Even if Professor Lin treats you as his favorite student, you can't snatch me away so blatantly. Do you plan on spending your 21st birthday with me in a house far apart from each other? It's not that. She actually wanted to go back. After so long, this was the first time she had been apart from Mo Jingshan for such a long time. She had long gotten used to working during the day and returning home at night to hug the other party. Now that they were forcibly separated, time had really slowed down. Mo Jingshan placed the documents in his hands down and loosened his collar. After a moment of silence, he asked, "What bonfire party? Can't you be absent? The spots are limited. Professor Lin specially reserved a spot for me, and it's really hard to refuse. Once it's decided, it can't be changed. I'm thinking that if it really can't be done, I'll celebrate my birthday on the lunar calendar. I won't celebrate my birthday on the solar calendar. I'll go back next month." Professor Lin had given her so much face. She couldn't possibly reject his good intentions. "Do we need to dress up for your bonfire party? There's no need. It's not like it's a banquet." Although Professor Lin's students are all from the upper class, there are many ordinary students in T University. This isn't the school's anniversary. It shouldn't be that grand. The entire student body of T University will be there. More or less, but there should be a limited number of spots. In total, there should only be a few hundred people. A few hundred? The man suddenly said coldly. There are only a dozen or so hedonistic young masters in Professor Lin's class. I've already endured enough to let them stay in the same classroom as you. Are you going to attend the bonfire party with a few hundred people? Chapter 194. On Saturday, the bonfire party started at 6:00 p.m. It was held by the river not far from T University. This river ran through T City, and the wind was chilly at night. It rustled against the lush trees on both sides of the river. Coincidentally, the 4 people from her dormitory were all on the list. Jinwon was still dressed in her usual clothes, while the other 3 were dressed simply. Wow! I didn't expect this river to be so beautiful. The lights on both sides are beautiful as well. Let's take a photo together. Ling Feifei suggested. Jinwon had not found an opportunity to take a photo of Su Xuei. To avoid alerting the enemy, she immediately agreed to this suggestion. After taking the photo, Jinwon asked Ling Feifei to send her a copy. She saved the photo and confirmed that Su Xuei's face was clear in the photo before sending it to Feng Ling. That night, 9:00 p.m. Mo Jingshan stood outside the condominium outside T University. Looking at the tightly locked door and the thin layer of dust on the lock, he was certain that Jinwon had not stayed here for the past half a month. He opened the door and entered. The lights in the room were not turned on. The sky was already dark, and only the neon lights outside the window could be seen. A bonfire party with the theme of students and school had not ended yet? He picked up his phone and called Jinwon. However, the other party's phone was turned off. Mo Jingshan's brows twitched. He looked into the distance at the lights on both sides of the river that ran through T City. He called again, but her phone was still turned off. He abruptly turned to leave. The moment he stepped out, he saw Feng Ling appear by the elevator. "Mr. Mo?" Feng Ling was clearly surprised to see him here. "Aren't you in High City? When did you come?" Mo Jingshan saw that Feng Ling did not follow Jinwon. He asked mildly, "Where's Jinwon?" Mrs. Mo has a bonfire party tonight. I was supposed to go with her, but she took the bus to the river with the people from the school. She called me earlier to say that her phone was almost out of battery and asked me to come back to get a portable power supply for her. Mo Jingshan coldly said. She already turned off her phone. Is that so? Feng Ling was suspicious. She took out her phone to check. A few minutes ago, Mrs. Mo just sent me a message. Why did it run out of battery so quickly? What message did she send you? Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Feng Ling paused. She was about to say that she was in a hurry to enter the elevator and hadn't looked at it when the man in front of her abruptly took her phone. Seeing the message from Jinwan, Mo Jingshan swiped open the screen, and a high-definition photo of the four of them appeared on his cell phone. There was a line of words below. Feng Ling, have you seen this person in a white dress before? Mo Jingshan's eyes were fixed on the face of the woman in the white dress. Before Feng Ling could see his expression clearly, the man had already walked to the elevator with a cold and gloomy expression. The man who was usually calm and indifferent was still endlessly cold at this time, and his sharp eyes seemed to be filled with killing intent in an instant. As sharp as Feng Ling was, she immediately sensed something from Mo Jingshan's expression. She immediately rushed to catch up with him. Jin Wan was sitting by the riverside, away from the bustling crowd. Bai Wei brought over a freshly roasted mutton skewer for her. Thank you. Jin Wan received it, picking up a skewer and taking a bite. Bai Wei brought over 2 cans of beer. Jin Wan was still hesitating whether she should drink it or not. At this moment, Bai Wei happened to receive a call and went to the other side. Jin Wan picked up the beer and weighed it in her hand. Drink some? Forget it, it was better not to drink. After all, she had promised Mo Jingshan, but she still wanted to drink some. Just as she was in a dilemma, Su Shui approached from behind. My stomach isn't feeling well. There are too many people by the riverside, and I can't see clearly. Where can I find a public bathroom? Can you accompany me to look for one? Jin Wan calmly glanced at her. It's in the forest over there. You can find it yourself if you walk that way. It's too dark in the forest. Come with me. I'm scared. Su Shui held her stomach, her complexion pale. It seemed like her stomach really wasn't feeling well. Jin Wan glanced at Bai Wei, who was on the phone, and turned to see Ling Feifei enjoying herself in the crowd. The people she was most familiar with here were the few of them. Su Shui was indeed too embarrassed to ask others to accompany her. Although Jin Wan did not like interacting too much with Su Shui, she always felt that this person was strange from head to toe. But after all, they were staying in the same dormitory. Let's go. Jin Wan placed the skewers and beer down, standing up and patting her pants. The two walked into the dark forest by the side. The lights by the river could not reach here, and the path ahead was too dark. Jin Wan said, My phone's out of battery. Turn it on. Otherwise, we won't be able to see the road clearly. My phone's also out of battery. Su Shui's voice was much softer than usual, as though she was purposely suppressing her voice. Jin Wan thought that her stomach was hurting, and did not suspect anything. She reached behind her to support her, and the two of them continued walking in. As the crowd grew further and further away, the surroundings became unbelievably dark. Jin Wan clearly remembered that there were lights near the public bathroom. Why were they all off? Jin Wan. All of a sudden, Su Shui's voice rang by her side. Jin Wan was still wondering what was wrong with the lights when she heard Su Shui's soft voice again. Are you afraid of the dark? Jin Wan was about to answer when she felt that something was wrong. She and Su Shui had walked in the dark all the way here. Why was she suddenly asking this now? It was impossible for the lights here to be turned off so coincidentally at this time. They must have been damaged by someone with this thought. Jin Wan's footsteps paused. She was about to turn around to look at Su Shui when she abruptly heard someone approaching. Hearing the sound, she instinctively wanted to call out, but before she could open her mouth, she was pressed down harshly. Her mouth and nose were also covered with a damp cloth. You guys, what are you doing? You. The surroundings were pitch black. She could not see Su Shui's expression, nor could she see the people around. Chapter 195. In the darkness, there was not a single crack of light to be found. After Jinwan woke up, her eyes were opened in vain, but she could only see darkness. From the moment she woke up, she struggled violently until she gradually lost all strength. She could only lie there motionlessly. She was lying on a relatively wide bench, her hands behind her back, firmly tied by ropes under the bench. Her feet were also firmly tied to the other end of the bench. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't move at all. Her mouth was sealed with tape, so she couldn't open her mouth to call for help. This kind of situation was pitch black. When she woke up, she even suspected that her rebirth was just an unrealistic dream. Perhaps she was still living in that boundless darkness of her previous life. Or perhaps she was still locked up in some poor and backward mountain village, waiting to be forcefully sold by the villagers. The darkness was frightening. She did not even know how much time had passed. All of a sudden, the sound of messy footsteps approached from outside. Jinwan subconsciously shut her eyes. Creak. The heavy metal door was opened. The sound of two people's footsteps approached. The air was filled with the sweat of an unfamiliar man, causing one to feel disgusted. Jinwan closed her eyes and did not move. Did you use too much medicine on that cloth? Why hasn't this chick woken up yet? Ignore her. Miss Su only told us to kidnap her and send her out when the time is right. Whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with us. She's so pretty. Isn't it too much of a pity to send her over like this? Why don't we play for a bit? Play your head. Miss Su told us to leave T-City immediately after we're done. This chick's background isn't simple. Isn't she just a T-University student? What kind of background can she have at such a young age? Don't ask so much. Immediately send her to that bar. If we don't send her there, we won't get a single cent of the remaining 1 million yuan. We don't know who leaked the news, but right now, this area has already been patrolled by police cars many times. Do things cleanly. Since she hasn't woken up yet, it'll save us some trouble. At this moment, Jinwan abruptly opened her eyes. The two tall and strong men were shining flashlights on her body. When they saw her suddenly open her eyes, they seemed to be startled. Jinwan narrowed her eyes slightly in the glare of the flashlight, but her mouth kept making woo-woo sounds. Big brother, does she want to talk? Woo-woo-woo. Jinwan made a few more sounds. Hearing that her voice seemed to have a different pitch, as if she really wanted to say something, the two men looked at each other and chose to ignore her. You woke up so quickly. How troublesome. Hurry up and take him away. Woo-woo-woo. Jinwan's eyes widened as she stared at them. She couldn't move her hands, and the tape on her mouth prevented her from saying a word. She could only stare at them with hope in her eyes and keep repeating those three tones. Big brother, she really seems to be saying something. The other man finally glanced at Jinwan. As Jinwan continued to struggle and make those few tones, he abruptly tore off the tape on her mouth. A piercing pain came from her lips. Jinwan couldn't care less. In such a situation, she couldn't shout, or else it would only bring about a fatal disaster. She took a deep breath and said, How much money did the people who kidnapped me promise to pay you? Let me go. I can pay double. Those people still owe you 1 million yuan, right? Let me go now, and I can give it to you immediately. She had just finished speaking when the man abruptly sealed the tape on her mouth again. Woo-woo. Jinwan stared hard at them, her mouth still repeating the same tone. Big brother, the man had a knife scar on his face. He coldly glanced at Jinwan. You want to live, right? Jinwan hurriedly nodded, her gaze sincere. She was certain that if these two were only doing this for money, perhaps there would be a chance. You have money to give us. The man still had a doubtful expression. Jinwan nodded again, making an woo sound. It was a confirmation. The money Miss Su gave us is her share. If you want to buy your life from our hands, it won't be as simple as just paying double. The man suddenly revealed a cold and greedy smile. He shone the flashlight on Jinwan's body, and finally shone the blinding light on her eyes. She had no choice but to close her eyes and turn her head to avoid it. He said in a rough voice, Miss Su wanted us to send you to T-City's largest underground bar. With your looks, you can easily sell for 2 million yuan a night there. After that, you can be sold to a smuggling ship in the Philippines and continue to earn a sum. Just our share is already quite a bit. If you want to buy your life from our hands, How much more can you pay? Jinwan's expression faltered. The two men's greedy expressions were too obvious. She tried her best to maintain her composure as she stared at their faces, wondering where their bottom line was. Big brother, she seems to be intentionally stalling for time. The moment the person by the side spoke, the man coldly narrowed his eyes and stared at Jinwan. Don't think about waiting for someone to save you just because you're wasting time. Right now your life is in our hands. I'll offer 5 million yuan. Will you give it? Jinwan's expression faltered for a moment before she nodded. Her gaze was sincere. How? A check. This man was clearly much more decisive and calm than the person by the side. He did not give Jinwan any chance to speak or shout for help. He only observed Jinwan's expression, watching for her to nod or shake her head. Jinwan nodded. You. The man by the side immediately stared at her with bright eyes, as though he had seen a god of fortune. The two exchanged glances, and suddenly pulled her up from the chair. The moment Jinwan's hands regained their freedom, the man who had been conversing with her the entire time took out a blank check from his pocket. The man pressed Jinwan onto the ground forcefully and tugged on one of her hands. He stuffed a pen into her hands. If you want your life, sign the check immediately. 5 million yuan. Account name and amount. Write it for me right now. Jinwan was pressed onto the ground. She stared at the blank check in front of her and suddenly felt like cursing. The two of them were clearly repeat kidnappers. It was clear that they were too familiar with the ways of this rich young master. The few sentences they exchanged clearly showed that they had no intention of letting her off. Instead, they were trying to swindle more money out of the victim. They actually carried around this kind of blank check, from who knows which bank they obtained it from. The hope and vitality that had just been ignited instantly dissipated. She lay stiffly on the ground, unmoving. She held the pen in her hand, but she stared at it intently. She refused to sign a single word. Chapter 196. The bones in Jinwan's hand were about to break. She endured the pain and stared at the check, unwilling to move. The man standing behind suddenly pulled out a sharp knife, lowering his voice to threaten her. You only have two choices. Sign the check, and we'll leave this knife to you. You can find a chance to cut the rope and escape. 5 million to buy a chance to escape. Or we can use this knife to cut the tendons in your arms and legs. Or we can cut your face piece by piece. Sign or not. Choose. Jian silently furrowed her brows. 5 million to buy a knife. However, these two people were not joking at all. The back of her hand was about to break. Although they were utterly heartless, the current situation was one of survival of the fittest. In the world of desperados, life was too cheap. She abruptly raised her eyes and glared at the man who was stepping on the back of her hand. The man saw her gaze and moved his foot away. He tossed the pen back to her hand and ordered, Sign. 5 million. Not a single cent less. Jinwan glanced at the knife in the other man's hand. The man also tossed the knife back to her. His meaning was clear. If she dared to sign, they would dare to give the knife to her. Whether or not she could seize the chance to escape was entirely up to her. Jinwan hesitated for a moment. She slowly moved her hand that was aching and numb from being stepped on earlier. She picked up the pen and signed the check. As she signed, she thought about what had happened. Her previous suspicions of Su Shui were correct. The other party did not come with good intentions. They pretended to be naive to approach her. If they were not inquiring about her, they were observing her every move. After hiding by her side for more than half a month, they indeed harbored evil intentions. Seeing that she had written everything she needed to write on the check, the two men finally pulled her up from the ground. Jinwan staggered, unable to stand steadily. Her hands were once again tied behind her. Although her body had left the bench, she was not in a state of freedom. She wondered if she would encounter two scoundrels who had no sense of morality at all. When the man in front tied her hands behind her back, he folded the foldable knife and stuffed it into her palm. He then tied her hands behind her back in a very clever way, so that no one could see what was in her hands. I've already given you the saber. Don't say that we don't follow the rules of the martial world. The man tied her up tightly, looking as if he was satisfied with the 5 million yuan. He lowered his voice and said, Miss Sue's people are guarding outside. We have to send you to the bar now. After we send you there, we'll leave. If the rope near your middle finger and index finger is cut, you'll be able to untie it yourself. What do you think? Was the 5 million yuan well spent? If Jin Wan's mouth wasn't taped, she really wanted to scold them. She suppressed her fear and anger, tightly holding onto the foldable knife in her hand. She then coldly stared at the two men. Stop glaring. It's rare to see someone as tactful as you. That Miss Sue's background isn't small. She knows where our hideout is. If it was any other brother, they wouldn't sell out all the brothers in their hideout for a mere 5 million yuan. Seeing that Jin Wan was obediently allowing them to tie her up, and did not struggle, the man spoke again, and signaled to the man beside him with his eyes. When the two men brought Jin Wan out, before she could clearly see her surroundings, her eyes were abruptly covered with a black cloth. The fear of falling into darkness once more caused her to lose confidence. She frantically struggled, but the two men had already brought her to a car. There should be someone in the car. They no longer had the patience they had when tying her up. They harshly scolded her and pushed her with force. Jin Wan abruptly felt as though she had been pushed into someone else's hands. Could it be that these people were Miss Sue's people? What exactly was Su Xue's background? Her eyes were covered and could not see anything. Suddenly, she was pushed into the car by those people. Outside T-City's largest underground bar, there was an endless stream of cars and neon lights. Among the rows of cars, Su Xue sat in a black Audi. From afar, she watched as Jin Wan was dragged out of a van by those people. She then watched as Jin Wan staggered as she was dragged into the bar. Only then did her lips slowly curve up. Her seemingly innocent face was dyed with sharp viciousness. After confirming that Jin Wan had already been brought in, and would not be able to easily escape, she finally called for the driver to drive away. The black Audi drove out of the street near the bar. On the road, Su Xue's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and excitedly picked up the call. Cousin, you're calling at this time. Is it to celebrate that I've helped you settle the matter? Hearing the voice from the other side of the phone, Su Xue smiled widely. You're still worried about me? Of course, I won't take her life. What I want to do is to help you destroy her. In the car, only Su Xue's complacent voice could be heard. Of course, if she dies, Mo Jingshan will only remember her forever. You won't have the chance to return to his side, and his heart won't be able to hold a place for anyone other than a dead person. But if she's destroyed, living in such a filthy state in this world, sooner or later, he'll lose his appetite for her. That Jin Wan is more vigilant than we thought. We were almost discovered by her. When she heard that I came from Los Angeles, she seemed to be especially sensitive to Los Angeles. I think she already knew of your existence a long time ago. No matter how vigilant she is, didn't she still end up in my hands? If it weren't for the fact that Uncle has grounded you at home, and you personally came from America, this show would have been even more exciting. If Mo Jingshan hadn't issued a warning to the Su family, Uncle wouldn't have grounded you. Even I feel it's a pity that you missed this good show. But don't worry. Leave this to me. I'll definitely beat that Jin Wan until there's no place left unscathed. I'll completely lose to you both physically and mentally. Su Xue was still talking to her phone. All of a sudden, the car she was sitting in screeched to a halt. She had just hung up the phone when she lost her grip, and abruptly dropped it. She raised her head, and was about to scold the driver with a cold expression when the corner of her eyes suddenly paused. Chapter 197. It was a black off-road vehicle. It decisively forced her car to stop. Su Xue's hand paused as she was about to pick up her phone. She stared ahead and suddenly said, "Drive." The driver said hesitantly, "But Miss Su, the car in front. I told you to drive. Drive away immediately. Hurry. Go around that car." Su Xue ordered anxiously. The driver could only start the engine, and quickly reverse the car. He then immediately turned the car around, and drove in the opposite direction. Su Xue picked up her phone and gripped it tightly. She stared at the off-road vehicle in the rearview mirror. Seeing that the car was approaching at a merciless speed, she rushed to shout, "Drive faster! Faster!" The driver sped up. His gaze was fixed on the car behind. Silently, he sensed a murderous intent approaching, and instinctively stepped on the accelerator. As they sped up, the black off-road vehicle also sped up. When they reached an empty road, the black off-road vehicle sped up even more. Seeing that she could not shake it off, Su Shui furrowed her brows and decided to give up the chase. She ordered the driver to stop the car in front. However, the moment the car stopped, Su Shui thought that the black off-road vehicle behind would also stop. At the very least, it would not hit her. However, the black off-road vehicle did not stop, nor did it slow down. Instead, it sped up again. By the time Su Shui reacted, the car had already rushed over. Ah! Pung! It was a loud sound that caused people's hearts to tremble. It was a huge collision. Su Shui's calm expression instantly turned pale. She sat in the car in a daze. Her car, which had been parked by the road, was forcefully knocked 2 or 3 meters away. The safety barrier by the side of the road had been completely deformed by the car. If the other party had used a little more force, her car would have rolled down the safety barrier. This road was lined with T-City's rivers. They were very high and very deep. If her car rolled down, she would definitely die. Her face was pale. She stared in disbelief at the dent in front of her car. After several seconds of silence, Su Shui slowly raised her head. She stared in shock at the unscathed off-road vehicle. The direction of the collision was so precise, and the hardest part of their car was used as a sharp blade. Was the person driving the car the bodyguard Mo Jingxian had arranged to stay by Jin Wan's side, or Mo Jingxian himself? Su Shui stared ahead with a startled expression. When the door of the black off-road vehicle opened, and Mo Jingxian stepped out of the car, all the blood in her body turned ice cold. T-City's underground bar. When the door of the stuffy room was opened again, in just a few minutes, Jin Wan was already suffocated by the stuffy air, and her body was covered with a layer of sweat. When the door was opened, she subconsciously raised her head. Although her eyes were covered with a black cloth, she still listened carefully to the voice on the other side. Is that her? An unfamiliar and rough voice sounded in front of them. The people around him echoed, and it seemed like someone was calling that person boss. Jin Wan furrowed her brows. She was not very familiar with the underground bars in T-City, but under normal circumstances, the people in these bars were all involved in illegal activities. It was impossible for them to be good people. These people mostly walked on the edge of the illegal world, and had some connections with the underworld. That Su Shui was even able to contact these kinds of people. Jin Wan could not help but wonder what exactly they did in Los Angeles. Her looks aren't bad. It's been a long time since I've seen such a beautiful one. Her skin is also so fair. She can definitely be sold for a good price. Bring her over. Afterward, someone came over and removed the black cloth from Jin Wan's face. Jin Wan narrowed her eyes. She was momentarily unable to adjust to the light, and was unable to see the person clearly. Her ponytail was abruptly undone, and her long hair scattered messily across her shoulders. Very good. She looks even more beautiful and delicate like this. Wipe her face clean. We'll start selling her in 10 minutes. Jin Wan forced her eyes open and looked forward. She could only see a man with a knife scar on his face, dressed in a black trench coat. He had a cigar in his mouth, and was commenting on her figure and appearance. After giving a few more instructions, he turned around and left. There were only a few people who appeared to be bodyguards left in the room. One of them suddenly brought an ice-cold towel over, and wiped her face harshly. Jin Wan's face hurt from the rubbing. She glared at them, but the tape on her mouth was still there. What are you glaring at? Behave yourself. The person who wiped her face coldly reprimanded. He then pinched her chin, and said in a rascally manner, "This little girl's looks are indeed not bad. After we sell her for a good price tonight, I wonder if boss will bestow her to us to play with for a few days, before selling her to the Philippines. Look at this little face, it's indeed so fair." As he spoke, he touched Jin Wan's face, and acted as though he was about to kiss her. Jin Wan shifted her face away in disgust. Her eyes were filled with anger and disgust as she glared at him. Damn it, why don't you glare at me again? This old man will dig out your eyes. The man abruptly spat on the ground. He was extremely dissatisfied with her stubborn temper. If boss had not said that he would sell her for a good price later, he really wished he could rip off her clothes right now. Jin-won continued to glare at him. The man used the towel to wipe her face and neck harshly again. He used a lot of force and rubbed her pale skin until it was slightly red. He then stopped and called for the others to bring her out. Afterward, just like in her previous life, Jin-won was like a fish on a chopping board. She was tied up and thrown into the bar stands. The clothes on her shoulders were slightly torn, revealing her fair shoulders. Her hair fell down to cover them, half covering her face. Her eyes, which were sealed with tape, tried their best to hide the fear and helplessness in them. She stared coldly at the people in the bar, and attracted the attention of most of them. Afterward, she did not pay attention to how much those people called out. She only knew that after the buyer was confirmed, she was directly brought down. She was thrown into the bar's basement. Her body was still tied up, and she was curled up on a single bed with a thin blanket. Although it was a basement, it was clearly prepared for those lovers. It was a very small room, but the decorations were very high-end. It was completely in the European style. Even the bed she was lying on was not cheap. There were also all sorts of waxes, candlesticks, whips, handcuffs, and other utensils. At this moment, the only light in the basement was a dim wall lamp. She narrowed her eyes slightly, carefully listening to the sounds outside. Chapter 198. Her bound hands were drenched in cold sweat. After confirming that the voices outside were far away, Jin-won carefully turned the folding knife she had been holding in her hand for a long time. As it turned, the 5 million yuan check she signed was not completely useless. The person who bound her hands was indeed skillful in tying the rope around her wrists. It could be said that he had been quite righteous. She twisted her wrist forcefully, and gradually, there was some space between her two hands. Then, she slowly opened the folding knife. Remembering what the man had said before, she used the sharp blade to cut the rope between her index finger and middle finger forcefully. With her hands tied, it was really inconvenient for her to move. She had already spent a lot of time and effort on these actions. Right now, her body was covered in a layer of sweat, and she could not use the strength to cut the rope. She could only use the knife to grind it bit by bit. After grinding for more than 2 minutes, the rope broke. She did not dare to relax. Bit by bit, she used the intricate knot on the rope to untie it completely. Once her hands were free, she quickly tore off the tape on her mouth. Her mouth was most likely torn red. She endured the pain and held her breath. She bent down and used the knife to cut the rope around her feet. When she finally regained her freedom, she carefully stood up bit by bit. Her legs were already numb from being tied up. She staggered to the door and listened to the movements outside. It was as though these people were certain that she would not be able to escape, and did not send anyone to guard the door. Earlier, when she was brought in, she knew that there was a narrow and dimly lit corridor outside. At the end of the corridor was a staircase, and up the staircase was a hidden door in the corner of the bar that was blocked by a sound system. Jin-won tried to push the door, and found that it was locked. No wonder there was no one guarding outside. She rushed to remove a thin, black hair clip from the top of her head. In her previous life, perhaps this was the only time she could thank her previous life for her miserable escape experience. Everything in her previous life had taught her a lot. At the very least, she could open a simple door like this. It was not a security door, and she only needed a little time to open it. Jin-won tried placing the hair clip by the doorknob toward the keyhole inside. She used force to poke the thinner side of the hair clip into the keyhole. Because she did not dare to make too much noise, she could only carefully push it back and forth in the keyhole. This basement only had a simple wooden door, and the lock was also a simple single lock. Time passed bit by bit. The anxiety in Jin-won's heart grew heavier and heavier. Every time she heard footsteps coming from outside, she would grab the hair clip in fright, and turn to hide behind the door in a defensive posture. She did this countless times and finally, the hair clip found its place in the keyhole. The sound of the door being unlocked was very soft. She gently released a breath, pinning the hair clip back on her head, and opened the door handle. The moment the door opened, the deafening roar of the bar instantly assaulted her ears. Jin-won stuck her head out and observed the surroundings. She then quietly closed the door and pressed against the wall. She lowered her head and tried her best not to be captured by the surveillance cameras in the corner. After much difficulty, she finally reached the staircase. All of a sudden, she saw a figure approaching. She was startled and immediately turned around to see that the door to the room beside her was not locked. She rushed to enter that door and leaned against it. Her heart beat heavily as she listened to the movements outside. The room before her was not lit. However, when she opened the door earlier, she saw that the layout of this room was almost the same as the one she was in earlier. It seemed like every room in this underground corridor was the same. She was considering how to escape. There were people all around the bar. She did not know which were the customers and which were the staff of the bar. How could she avoid them? All of a sudden, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. As she listened to the sound, the hair on Jin-won's body stood on end. The footsteps seemed to be heading toward the room she was in earlier. There was a sudden silence inside, and this silence gradually made her panic. As expected, as the strange silence passed, she heard an angry and suppressed voice. She shouldn't have escaped too far. Go look for her immediately. She actually brought something that can cut the rope? Which bastard kidnapped her? Damn it. Go look for her. Then the sound of footsteps outside gradually increased. It was somewhat hurried, and at the same time, the surrounding rooms were kicked open one by one. Jin-won furrowed her brows and carefully hid under a black shelf by the side. She squatted down and held her breath. Look in every room. As the footsteps approached, someone abruptly kicked open the door of this room. The lights in the room were turned on. As if they had been inspecting the other rooms along the way, they hurriedly glanced around the room, turned off the lights, closed the door, and went to check the other rooms. Perhaps they did not expect Jin-won to hide in such a close place. The burly men were in a hurry to check, and did not notice Jin-won hiding under the table. Jin-won released a light breath and crawled out from under the table. She listened to the movements outside, and then ran to the door, pressing her ear against it. She didn't know what time it was, but she heard the footsteps of those people getting further and further away. It seemed like they had gone out to search, and didn't continue to stay in the underground corridor. She waited for a while before carefully opening the door. Then, she slowly walked to the staircase. Most of the people in this bar were their men. How was she going to escape? Climbing up the stairs, she saw the neon lights in the bar. Jin-won bent down and carefully pushed open the door behind the stereo system. She looked out and saw all kinds of people outside. She lowered her head and covered her face with her loose hair. She followed the corner of the door and walked to the side. When a waiter approached, she hurriedly squatted down and hid behind a sofa. She then turned to look at the waiter. He was holding a tray and wine in his hand, and was talking to the waiter by the side. Clearly, the flashing lights here made it difficult for people to see clearly. The waiter did not notice Jin-won. Jin-won turned around, maintaining her squatting position, as she ran to the back of the other sofa. The lights in the bar flickered incessantly. Taking advantage of the dimming of the lights, she successfully leaped over without attracting anyone's attention. She walked along the back of these sofas, and came to a place with fewer people. She looked out and planned to run out in one breath. Chapter 199. Unfortunately, there were people guarding the entrance of the bar. Jin-won wanted to rush out in a fit of anger, but that was only a thought. The moment her figure appeared, no matter how fast she ran, the moment she was discovered by the people at the door, they nimbly came over and pressed her down. Just as she was about to cry for help, they covered her mouth and dragged her back. Jin-won could not break free. In the blink of an eye, she was brought back to the basement and thrown onto the ground. The pain on her body could not compare to the hatred in her heart. All her earlier struggles were futile. She raised her head and saw that the boss with the knife scar on his face was actually here. He stepped forward and grabbed her hair. Jin-won endured it and did not cry out in pain. However, her body was forced to lean forward due to the tug of her hair. The boss's expression was ugly as he dragged her and threw her harshly onto the bed. You're the first woman to have the ability to escape from the basement. The boss coldly glanced at her before ordering the people behind him. Watch her. When the buyer is done drinking, don't let her escape again. If she escapes again, don't even think of living. Afterward, the door was locked once more. There were already people guarding the door. Jinwan glared at the door, her hands gripping the thin blanket beneath her tightly. Right now, her hands and feet were no longer tied up, but there was no way she could leave this room. Not long after, the so-called buyer, a fat, bespectacled middle-aged man in his 40s, came in. The moment he saw Jinwan, he put on a wretched smile and approached her step by step. Jinwan was startled, taking advantage of the fact that the guards had left and that the bespectacled man had drunk too much. She grabbed the lamp on the bedside table and threw it at him. Your temper isn't small, the bespectacled man said as he suddenly took off his clothes, revealing his plump upper body. Jinwan was disgusted by the sight. She leaned against the wall, but felt that this scene was extremely familiar. In her previous life, she was sold to a father and son's home in that poor mountain village. That father and his foolish son had once stripped naked and forced her into a corner. Even though she had escaped, even though she had mutilated herself and covered herself in blood, so that they couldn't get close to her or touch her, those terrifying memories still lingered in her mind. Jinwan didn't want to be affected by the terrible memories of her previous life. She tried to calm herself down, but the white flesh in front of her still made her nauseous. Just as she suddenly leaned against the wall and retched, the bespectacled middle-aged man suddenly rushed over, grabbed her hair, and pulled her close to him. As soon as Jinwan's whole body was pressed against his white flesh, her hair stood on end. Let me go. Little bitch, I heard that you wanted to escape just now. I spent more than 2 million to buy you a few nights, and you dare to run? Do you believe that this old man won't kill you right now? The other party ignored Jinwan's struggles, and abruptly threw her harshly back onto the bed. He threw her with too much force, and Jinwan was thrown to the innermost position against the wall. Her head knocked heavily against the wall, and she instantly felt dizzy. Her vision darkened, and she raised her hand to touch her forehead. When she lowered her hand, she saw a patch of blood on her palm. The wall was decorated with all kinds of small pebbles, so it wasn't smooth. Her impact was not light either. Seeing the blood on her palm, Jinwan's vision darkened. She forced herself to sit against the wall, and in the blink of an eye, she saw him pouncing toward her. Her heart instantly beat wildly, but the moment she tried to move, she felt dizzy and could not move. She could only force her body to move slightly, but it was completely useless. Don't touch me. Scram. At this moment, Jinwan did not have the strength to struggle. Even sitting steadily was difficult. The sound of clothes being forcefully torn came from the air. She cried out in protest, but she suddenly felt the side of the bed sink. The bespectacled middle-aged man was pressing down on her with his fat body that was about to ooze oil. The bespectacled man took advantage of the fact that she did not have the strength to dodge, and saw the blood flowing from her head. The smell of blood and her white skin stimulated his desires and senses. He frantically pressed her down on the bed, pressing down on her. He lowered his head to nibble on the alluring white skin on her neck. Jinwan felt a wave of disgust. Her heart harshly contracted as she screamed, "Don't!" A small portion of her clothes had been torn open. The buttons on the front of her body popped open like beans. Her clothes were suddenly wide open. Even though she was still wearing a tight-fitting camisole underneath, she still felt a chill on her upper body. Both her hands were held by her sides. She did her best to curl up and kick him away. Her lips were already bitten hard by herself, and they turned purple. Her entire body trembled violently. The scene of her struggling on the bed by her father in her previous life overlapped with the scene before her. Jinwan wanted to calm down and protect herself, but she could not endure the double stimulation. Her entire body was on the verge of breaking down and screaming, "Smelly whore! You're quite strong." The bespectacled man pressed down on her. He lowered his head and was about to tear off her clothes. Jinwan abruptly turned her head and bit down on his ear. She used the strength to bite off his ear. Ah! In pain, he abruptly pushed her away. He raised his hand and gave her a harsh slap. Half of Jinwan's face was in so much pain that she lost consciousness. The dizziness in her head intensified. He abruptly grabbed her hair, looked at the blood on her forehead and the corner of her mouth, put down his hand that was covering her ear, and slapped the same side of her face harshly. Seeing that half of her face was already swollen, he finally put on an expression that said he wanted to trample her to death. Taking advantage of the fact that she no longer had the strength to struggle, he grabbed a corner of the blanket and stuffed it into her mouth to prevent her from biting him again. Jinwan's breathing was heavy. Looking at the disgusting face and white flesh in front of her, she suddenly retched. Suddenly, she heard the sound of police sirens near the bar. Jinwan thought she was hearing things. Her weak body was pressed against the bed by the bespectacled man. He tugged at her hair with one hand and tugged at her jeans with the other. Because the zipper of her pants was slightly tight, he used both hands to tug at it while cursing. Jinwan wanted to get up and push him away, but she really could not muster up any strength. Just as the zipper was pulled open, the bespectacled man's eyes brightened. He scolded her again, calling her a smelly whore. He used force to pull down her pants. All of a sudden, a loud pung came from the tightly shut basement door. It was kicked open. Her vision was blurry. Jinwan did not even have the strength to turn her head to look. She could only see Mo Jingshan's face from the corner of her eye. Chapter 200. The bespectacled man's hand was still pressed against Jinwan's body, tugging on the zipper of her pants without letting go. This unbearably filthy scene caused her blood to turn cold. When she turned to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze, she felt as though she had fallen into an ice cave. Mo Jingshan's clear eyes were already filled with a storm that was akin to a landslide or tsunami. Jinwan was dazed for a moment. Wasn't he still in High City? Why was he in T-City? Could she have been so agitated that she was hallucinating? However, she could not speak. She could only stare in that direction with a pair of blank and empty eyes. It was as though it was the only warm light in the darkness of despair. It was as though it had saved her from the terror of her previous lives, allowing her to finally breathe. She could barely see how he had come over. She only knew that the bespectacled man on top of her suddenly cried out in pain. The sound of bones breaking rang out, as though someone had twisted his arm. She tried her best to focus, and saw that Mo Jingshan was within arm's reach. His cold eyes did not even blink as he twisted his arm, throwing the wretched bespectacled man off the bed. She felt her body lighten, and in an instant, she felt a familiar coat with a clean and refreshing smell covering her body. Jinwan closed her eyes tiredly, forcing her tears back. By her ears, the bespectacled man's pained cries rang out one after another. She did not know what Mo Jingshan was doing, nor did she wish to look. Right now, even if some people here were to lose their lives, she would not care about the law or human nature. The man fell to the ground and was kicked again. He was kicked 2 meters away and slammed into the wall. His head slammed heavily against the cobblestone wall, and he cried out in pain. His face was flushed red from the pain, and he pointed shakily at the man who had suddenly barged in. He wanted to speak, but the sound of the door opening drowned him out. Feng Ling rushed in. When she saw the scene inside, she immediately understood something. She was about to enter when she suddenly heard Mo Jingshan's cold voice. "Close the door." Feng Ling glanced at Jinwan, who was lying on the bed, and subconsciously closed the door behind her, cutting off the gazes of the police outside. Jinwan was still in a daze when she was suddenly supported up. She opened her eyes to see Mo Jingshan's face. She wanted to ask why he had come to T-City, but when the words reached her lips, the slightly dried blood on the corner of her lips and her swollen face caused her to furrow her brows. Before she could speak, she heard Mo Jingshan whisper by her ear, "If it hurts, don't speak. I'm here." Although his voice was cold and low, he was gently coaxing and comforting her. At the same time, he wrapped the upper half of her body tightly with the coat she was wearing. He then raised his hand to push aside the hair on her forehead that was stained with blood. When he saw the wound on her head, he gently turned her face to check the palm marks on her face. The killing intent in his eyes was obvious. Although Jinwan knew that she was out of danger, her body was still trembling instinctively. All the struggle and fear from before were still spreading in her body and mind. She wanted to calm herself down, but the scenes from her previous life and her previous life kept dominating her rational nerves. Her body was trembling, her hands were trembling, her eyes opened and closed, and her eyes were bloodshot. Her eyelashes were trembling, and she tried hard to hold back the tears that were on the verge of falling. Mo Jingshan held her trembling body tightly, gently caressing her hair mixed with blood and sweat as he whispered, "Don't be afraid. I'm here, in front of you. It's all over. Be good and close your eyes. Don't listen. Don't look." Jinwan did not move. Mo Jingshan raised his hand and gently covered her eyes. "Don't be afraid, okay?" Feng Ling saw Jinwan's sorry figure and the blood on her head, and abruptly kicked the middle-aged bespectacled man's crotch harshly. The subsequent scream caused Jinwan, who was leaning against Mo Jingshan's arms, to tremble. It was as though every time she heard this disgusting man scream, she would be stimulated in a different way. "Cripple him and gag his mouth. He's too noisy." Mo Jingshan saw that Jinwan could not take any stimulation right now and sternly ordered. Feng Ling quickly grabbed a piece of clothing on the ground, rolled it into a ball, and stuffed it into the man's mouth. She then stepped on his leg, and when he kept groaning in pain, she gave him a roundhouse kick on the head. Right now, only muffled cries of pain could be heard in the basement. The bespectacled man's head was covered in blood and sweat. In the end, he leaned against the corner of the wall and fell to the ground. He looked at the short-haired woman in front of him with a frightened expression. He trembled and tried to move back, but was still kicked harshly by Feng Ling. This time, the kick landed on his abdomen. The bespectacled man was in so much pain that his eyeballs almost popped out. Following that, there was the sound of his other arm bone being broken. Even though his mouth was gagged, the miserable groans were enough to tell what kind of inhumane torture and revenge he was currently enduring. Jinwan closed her eyes and leaned against Mo Jingshan's chest. Her eyes were covered by him, and she could not see anything here. However, the red and swollen patch on her pale face was still shocking. Miserable groans followed one after another. Jinwan's hand suddenly touched the folding knife that she had previously thrown by the bedside. Her movements faltered, and she suddenly gripped the knife tightly. In a hoarse voice she said, "Jingshan, put me down." Mo Jingshan glanced at her and released her. Although Jinwan was in a sorry state, and her head was covered in blood, with Mo Jingshan's clothes draped over her, she still felt a special sense of security. She turned her eyes toward the bespectacled man who had been tortured to the point where he wished he was dead. She abruptly got off the bed. Feng Ling turned back to look at her. She saw that Jinwan was staggering and could barely stand. She rushed over to support her, but was stopped by Mo Jingshan's gaze. Seeing that Mo Jingshan did not move to stop her, Feng Ling faltered and took a step back. As expected, Jinwan opened the folding knife in her hand. Her reddened eyes stared at the disgusting man in the corner, who was barely breathing. Seeing the white, fleshy flesh on his body, the scenes of that small village in her previous life flashed before her eyes. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she abruptly pounced forward and ruthlessly stabbed the knife in her hand into his palm. The bespectacled man's entire body convulsed in pain. He opened his bloodshot eyes and stared at her in disbelief. This was the hand that had ripped off her clothes earlier. Jinwan forcefully pulled out the knife and stabbed it into the base of his thigh. Seeing blood gurgling out, her heart that was filled with suppressed fear finally felt a little better. She continued to brandish the knife in her hand. Her eyes did not even blink. Not only did she stab once, she stabbed again and again. Even when the bespectacled man's entire body was covered in a pool of blood, she still did not stop. Mo. Feng Ling watched this scene and wanted to step forward. However, she saw that although Jinwan's stabs were extremely vicious, most of them were only stabbing the man's legs, hands, and arms. She did not injure any vital parts. Chapter 201. Since she needed to vent, he would let her vent. After all, Mr. Mo was here. No one could touch a single hair on her. Even when his entire body was covered in blood, Jinwan's eyes were bloodshot as she continued stabbing him with the knife. Outside, The sound of the police knocking on the door could be heard. Emo Jingshan abruptly stood up and walked over to Jinwan's back, pulling her into his embrace. He pressed her tightly against his chest, forcefully stopping her from charging forward. He bent down to whisper by her ear. "All right, that's enough." Jinwan's eyes were still bloodshot as she glared at the man who was convulsing in pain and had no strength to stand up. She gritted her teeth and glared at him. Emo Jingshan seized the opportunity before the police knocked on the door and snatched the knife from her hand, throwing it to the ground. Jinwan seemed to have lost her mind. She struggled desperately to break free from his embrace and continued to charge toward the man. Emo Jingshan pressed her down. "Wan, calm down." Jinwan did not listen and continued to struggle. Emo Jingshan abruptly turned her around, forcing her to face him. His deep, black eyes stared at her. "Jinwan." After seeing Emo Jingshan's face clearly, Jinwan's movements stiffened. She no longer struggled and only stared at him in a daze. Her bloodshot eyes stared into his black ones. His heavy voice carried a hint of coaxing by her ear, calming her agitated and violent emotions. "I'll make them pay the price they deserve. Those who shouldn't be breathing won't be spared. Right now, you need to calm down and rest. If you're injured, you need to go see a doctor. Don't make me worry. Be obedient." Jinwan stared at him for a long while before softly leaning into his embrace. She closed her eyes, her head drooping weakly against his chest. "Mrs. Emo." Seeing that she had fainted, Feng Ling furrowed her brows. Her gaze was filled with worry and heartache. Emo Jingshan did not speak. He wrapped Jinwan tightly with his jacket and carried her up by the waist. His cold eyes glanced at the half-dead man covered in blood on the ground. "Cooperate fully with the police's investigation. Capture all the hidden gangs in this underground bar. Before dawn, I want none of them to be spared." Feng Ling nodded and did not speak further. She watched as Emo Jingshan carried Jinwan and was about to leave when she suddenly said, "Mr. Emo, Miss Sue's cousin." Hearing these words, Emo Jingshan's eyes darkened slightly. He used an extremely cold voice to say, "You don't have to interfere in America's Sue family's matters. I have my own plans on how to deal with people who refuse to mend their ways." Feng Ling understood the hidden meaning in his words and nodded. Since the Sue family did not take Emo Jingshan's warning to heart, then no matter how powerful the Sue family's background was, they would not have peace in the future. When the police rushed in and saw this scene, they also saw the middle-aged, bespectacled man covered in blood on the ground. None of them expected this to happen. When they saw Emo Jingshan carrying Jinwan, whose face was pale and head was covered in blood, out, none of them dared to stop him. Only one of the police officers approached, his expression trembling with fear and concern. "Mr. Emo, this?" The underground bar caused such a ruckus on a street, and T-City's police didn't even put on an act to control this place. Did they think that T-City's sky is high and the emperor is far away, and no one would be able to investigate? Emo Jingshan threw down the words in a heavy voice. T-City's police force is worthy of suspicion. The police officer's expression immediately stiffened. "Mr. Emo, don't worry. This bar and everything that happened today will all be recorded. We will definitely give you a satisfactory answer." Emo Jingshan carried the unconscious Jinwan in his arms and walked out through the path that the police had automatically opened up. He walked up from the basement. Inside the bar, the owner with a knife scar on his face and his subordinates were all restrained by the police. Emo Jingshan coldly glanced at the so-called bar boss. "You dare to touch my woman? Are you tired of living?" Emo Jingshan's voice seemed to be coated with a layer of frost. The bar boss did not make a sound. When he learned that the woman he brought in today was actually the wife of the great Emo Corporation's CEO, he knew that it was useless for him to walk this path for so many years. Today he was really finished. By the time Jinwan was brought out of the bar, it was already late at night. There were more than 10 police cars parked outside the bar. Even though she was unconscious, she did not feel safe. Hearing the sirens of the police cars outside, she closed her eyes and silently furrowed her brows. Half an hour later, at the hospital, a group of helpless doctors exchanged glances before turning to look at the woman, who was curled up on the bed. Her head was still covered in blood, and her body was trembling uncontrollably. 10 minutes ago, this Miss G was sent in. She was instructed to clean up her wounds and check if there were any other injuries or problems on her body. Because the police had followed along, the gentleman who brought her in was currently negotiating with the police outside the consultation room. However, this Miss G had already been here for more than 10 minutes. Even now, she did not allow any of them to touch her. Regardless of whether it was a doctor or a nurse, or a man or a woman, no one was allowed to approach her. Even a harmless-looking and considerate nurse handed her a glass of water, wanting her to drink some water to calm down. But the glass was pushed away and dropped by her. It could be seen that her emotions were very unstable, and she must have suffered a huge shock. Her eyes were unfocused, and only the trembling of her body showed that her condition was not very good. Miss G. The doctor looked at her registration book, and then at her name. He tried his best to comfort her. "You're safe now. This is the hospital. We're going to help you deal with your wounds. The blood on your head is about to scab. If you don't deal with it, bacteria will grow in the wound. I hope you can." Jinwan seemed not to hear him. As the doctor approached, she abruptly curled up her legs, hugged her knees with her arms, and buried her face in her knees motionless. The doctor was about to take advantage of her silence to help her over, but Jinwan suddenly raised her head and looked at them warily with red eyes. It was as though she would bite off the wrist of anyone who dared to touch her. Like a wounded little beast, she licked her wounds and did not allow anyone to approach. The doctor had no choice. Not to mention examining her. They couldn't even approach her to touch her. Although her clothes were only slightly torn, her inner clothes were still there. Her pants and all the important parts of her body were not touched, and she did not suffer any irreparable damage. Jinwan seemed to have suffered more than this simple stimulation. In her heart, there seemed to be a huge black hole that had been dug out today. There were countless scars in it. She was afraid of exposing them, but she could not hide them in her heart. Chapter 202. Seeing him come in, the medical staff all turned to look at the man with a strong aura. Mo Jingshan was still dressed in the same clothes. His shirt was stained with some blood from Jinwan's head, but he did not look disheveled. Seeing this cold and tall man with a cold and solemn expression on his handsome face, all the medical staff in the consultation room were afraid of his clear and cold gaze. After all, he had sent her in for more than 10 minutes, but no one had been able to treat Miss G's wound. Sir, Miss G doesn't want us to touch her." One of the doctors spoke up. "Her emotions are unstable. We're afraid that if we forcefully touch her, it will add too much burden and agitation to her heart. You see." Mo Jingshan looked at Jinwan, who was surrounded by several people, pursed his thin lips coldly, took long steps and went straight over. When he approached, Jinwan was still curled up there helplessly and did not even raise her head. He had never seen Jinwan like this. The Jinwan he saw was cheerful and bright. Although her personality had changed a few months ago, she was still the same as before. It was just that she was more rational and had more goals in life. She was still as confident and bright as ever. He had never seen her so pale, and her eyes were filled with fear, as if she was on guard against the entire world. She even curled up there, her body trembling nonstop. She didn't dare to look at anyone. She put her hand by her mouth and bit her finger hard. It was as if there was something that she couldn't bear, and was constantly disturbing her rationality. Mo Jingshan bent down, carried her from the corner of the wall by the bed, stroked her back, and said softly, "You are injured. You need to see a doctor. Be good. We'll go back after treating your wound." Hearing Mo Jingshan's voice, Jinwan slowly raised her head. She could not hide the frightened expression on her face. However, because she saw that the man beside her was Mo Jingshan, although she did not resist his touch, her eyes were still full of wariness. Seeing that she had become obedient, the doctor wanted to take the opportunity, while she was being held by this man, to clean the blood on her head with alcohol cotton. However, before he touched her, he heard the woman's low and cold voice. "Don't touch me, doctor." Sure enough, other than this gentleman, she really did not allow anyone to touch her. How much stimulation must one have gone through? And how much trust and reliance must one have on this gentleman to make him the only one who was special? Seeing that she was really afraid of other people's touch, he stroked her head and asked softly, "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" She shook her head. "Does your head hurt?" he asked in a low voice. She still shook her head, but winced at the pain when his hand touched the wound on her head. Mo Jingshan didn't say more. He signaled the doctor with his eyes to place everything that could be used to treat the wound on the shelf by his hand. He then personally wiped the blood from her forehead and cheeks, and then wiped the area around her wound. Seeing that her wound was not very deep, and was only a scratch caused by the cobblestone wall, and did not need to be stitched up, he took the alcohol cotton and continued to wipe her wound. Although the wound was not deep, it was not small. Jin Wan's entire body trembled from the piercing pain from the alcohol cotton. However, when Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her with concern, she bit her lips hard and did not make a sound. She endured the pain and did not move. "Don't bite yourself." Mo Jingshan took a clean piece of gauze, folded it into a thick square, and placed it by her mouth. When Jin Wan bit the gauze, he continued to disinfect her wound. During this time, Jin Wan did not make a single sound of pain. However, her increasingly pale complexion revealed how much pain she was in. Finally, Mo Jingshan put the gauze on her wound and stroked her hair that was stained with blood and sweat. He used a rubber band borrowed from the female doctor to tie her hair to the back of her head and asked for an ice pack to apply on the swollen side of her face. After doing all this, Jin Wan leaned against his chest and did not speak. She still did not allow anyone to touch her, and was not allowed to do any checkups. He repeatedly asked if she was feeling uncomfortable. After confirming that there were no other problems, Mo Jingshan brought her out of the hospital. After returning to the condo, Jin Wan quickly fell asleep. However, nightmares kept coming, and she would wake up every 5 minutes. Even though Mo Jingshan had been holding her to sleep, she would still wake up frequently. Each time she woke up, she would stare at the lights in the room for a long time, as though trying to ascertain where she was. Only when she gradually calmed down and was certain that she was safe did she close her eyes again. Not long after, she would wake up again. This repeated until the wee hours of the morning. Only then did she sleep a little longer. However, in her dreams, her hands were still tightly gripping onto Mo Jingshan's sleeves, as though she was afraid that he would leave her alone. In the wee hours of the morning, everything was silent. Mo Jingshan's phone vibrated by the bedside. He glanced at Jin Wan, who had slept peacefully for more than half an hour in his arms. He reached for the phone, glanced at it, and picked it up. The other party clearly did not expect him to pick up the call. After so long, he had been ignored countless times. However, this time, he actually picked up. "Jingshan." A clear and pleasant female voice came from the other end of the phone. "I'm very sorry about Xue's matter. She is. After that delivery incident, I warned you not to touch Jin Wan. Did you ignore my words?" The man's voice carried a chill that could penetrate one's heart. The icy temperature seemed to have pulled down the temperature in the room. The woman on the other end of the phone was about to speak when she heard him coldly say, "Regardless of whether it's you or anyone else in the Su family, since I've already given up on the last bit of tolerance I have for you, from today onwards, you will know the consequences of provoking me." The other party did not have time to say another word before the call was coldly hung up. Mo Jingshan tossed the phone onto the table. He turned to see that Jin Wan had begun to furrow her brows in her sleep. Her uneasy hands were tightly gripping onto his sleeves, as though she was being chased by a frightening person in her dreams. It was as though she had nowhere to run, and her entire body was tense as she slept by his side. The man's hand avoided the wound on her head and rubbed it gently. After several minutes of comfort, Jin Wan's body gradually relaxed. Her face was pressed against his chest, and her brows slowly unfurled. If it was only the incident in the bar's basement that had agitated her, it would be normal for her to feel uneasy. However, from her various actions, it was clear that the agitation she had received was not that simple. Chapter 203. Jinwan woke up from a dream. The moment she opened her eyes, the room was filled with darkness. She rushed to touch her side. It was not a familiar environment, but it was not unfamiliar either. The moment her hand touched the bedside lamp, the lights in the room abruptly turned on. At the same time, the curtains were slowly pulled open and sunlight shone in. The darkness in the room was replaced by a warm light. After seeing everything in the room clearly, she slowly released a sigh of relief. This was her apartment outside of T University. It was not the basement of the bar, nor was it the barren mountain village in her previous life, where she could not even find a way out. She raised her hand to press against her head, recalling everything that happened last night. She was not sure if it was a dream or not, but the moment her hand touched the wound on her forehead, she immediately hissed in pain. The scene in the bar's basement filled her mind, and her eyes panicked. At this moment, the bedroom door was opened, and she subconsciously raised her head. Mo Jingshan's tall figure stepped into the warm light of the bedroom. Jinwan's tense emotions immediately relaxed. She released the hand that was tightly gripping the blanket. I thought you were in High City. I can't go back for your birthday, but I have to come over. Mo Jingshan's gaze was clear, as though everything that happened in the bar's basement last night had already passed. He did not continue to agitate her. The man sat down by her bedside. Jinwan instinctively raised her hand to hug his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. She breathed in the clear fragrance of his body, closed her eyes and softly said, "Thank you." To Mo Jingshan, these two words were meaningless. In fact, they should not have come from her mouth. But to Jinwan, these two words were the most important. Thank him for bringing her back from the hands of those vicious people who preyed on the weak. Thank him for preventing her from experiencing those terrifying and helpless experiences again. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. What silly words are you saying? Does your head hurt? Jinwan raised her hand to touch her head, but before her hand could touch the bandage, he held her wrist. Although it's only a superficial wound, it's not small. Don't touch it carelessly. Jinwan raised her eyes to see that Mo Jingshan's arm was still wrapped around her. She could tell that he did not sleep last night, and spent the entire night taking care of her. She was extremely glad that she had escaped last night, and had not been defiled. Otherwise, she would not know how to face this man now. But when she thought about how her body had been touched a few times last night, even if it wasn't an important part, it still made her feel uncomfortable. Did I not shower after I came back from the hospital last night? She only remembered that she fell asleep as soon as she returned. Jinwan took a long shower when she suddenly heard movements outside. She got up, changed her clothes and walked out of the bathroom. She saw Feng Ling standing by the door of the condo. She seemed to have just arrived. They've all been taken care of. Everyone who attacked Mrs. Mo in the bar last night, as well as their accomplices, have all been arrested. Not a single one escaped. Feng Ling was reporting the situation outside to Mo Jingshan. She turned to see Jinwan coming out of the bathroom, and suddenly took out a check from her pocket. Mrs. Mo, is this the check you signed? Jinwan was surprised to see this check. She stared at it for a moment and nodded. It's the two people who drugged me and kidnapped me. In order to save my life, I had no choice but to sign a check for 5 million yuan. But perhaps the knife she had exchanged for 5 million at that time wasn't useless. At the very least, she had gone through a not-so-smooth escape in the middle, and it had more or less delayed her for more than half an hour. That's right. Feng Ling placed the check on the coffee table and said, the two of them wanted to exchange the check and escape from T-City overnight. However, they were discovered by our people. They were captured at the bank, and this check fell into my hands. Jinwan stepped forward to take the check. Looking at the words on it, she directly tore it up and threw the shredded paper into the wastebasket by the side. Chapter 204. With Mr. Mo personally making an appearance, the T-City police did not dare to be negligent. Those who should have been arrested were all caught, and those who should have been dealt with did not live to see the sun rise today. Hearing this, Jinwan subconsciously glanced at Feng Ling. Although Feng Ling did not say much, her meaning was clear. The person who almost tainted her last night was most likely dead. Did I kill him? When Jin-won asked this, her tone was calmer than she had imagined. After all, she remembered how many times she had stabbed that person last night. No. The wounds you stabbed him yesterday were not fatal. At most, he lost too much blood. The real cause of death was because he resisted too much when he was being arrested, causing the police to accidentally injure him. Feng Ling mildly curved her lips at Jin-won, indicating for her not to think too much. How could a person who was already half dead have the strength to resist in front of the police? However, even if Jin-won had the answer in her heart, she did not say much. Some people deserved to die. Since things had already reached this stage, she did not have the heart to feel pity for the state of the universe. Feng Ling used this method to stop her from thinking too much, and Jin-won accepted this ending. It was better than letting her know that the disgusting person was still alive, and making her unable to eat every day. Seeing that Jin-won did not say more, Mo Jingshan sat on the sofa and indicated for her to come over. Does your head still hurt? As she approached, the man's hand touched her head. Although he avoided her wound, he purposely touched other parts of her head, as though to make sure she did not have any other injuries. It doesn't hurt. Last night, when I was struggling, I was thrown against the wall and hit my head. Jin-won pulled his hand down from her head and said, I know you're afraid I'll have a concussion. Last night, I did feel a little dizzy, but I'm much better now. Don't worry about me, I'm really fine. She had already calmed down and needed to think about many things. Recently, no matter if it was her injuries or the various situations, they all seemed to be related to someone in Los Angeles. When Jin-won's hand was held by Mo Jingshan, she suddenly asked, That's Su Shiwei. What exactly is her background? Is her goal to destroy me, or does she have other plans? Knowing that Mo Jingshan was by her side, Jin-won turned her eyes to Feng Ling and stared into her eyes. I sent her photo to you before the accident. Have you checked it? Any results? Feng Ling's expression faltered. Her gaze paused on Jin-won's face for a moment. She was about to speak when she suddenly felt Mo Jingshan's grip on her hand tighten. There's nothing for you to do here. Go out first, Mo Jingshan calmly said. His words were directed at Feng Ling. Seeing Feng Ling turn to leave, Jin-won subconsciously tried to withdraw her hand from Mo Jingshan's, only to be held tightly by him. What do you want to ask? He looked at her, his eyes clear and calm. Jin-won looked at him and suddenly felt a strong urge to pull her hand out of his. But Mo Jingshan didn't let go and looked at her fixedly. Let go of me first. She frowned and tried to pull her hand out of his palm several times. I won't. Jin-won was exasperated. She wanted to be angry, but it wasn't the right time. She could only grit her teeth and ask, Is Su Shiwei the fiancé you had in America? Mo Jingshan stared at the woman who was sitting on the sofa with him. Her slightly pale face was clearly suppressing her emotions. There was even a piece of gauze stuck on the wound on her forehead. Under the light from the window, she appeared frail and weak, but she still had the stubbornness of trying to maintain her rationality. No, he answered. No. Jin-won's expression was surprised. Then why did she target me? Could it be that everything that happened before and after was just a coincidence? Su Shiwei came from Los Angeles. There shouldn't be any mistake about this. If she isn't your fiancé, who else could she be? It can't be that a woman who appeared out of nowhere is a lunatic who finds me an eyesore and wants to harm me, right? She must have a motive for everything she did. After being reborn, Jin-won was too good at enduring. After enduring for so long, she really couldn't take it anymore. After what happened last night, who could endure it? She stared at the handsome face in front of her and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath and tried to pull her hand out again, but she still failed. I don't have a so-called fiancé. At least for now. I only have you, Mrs. Mo. Mo Jingshan didn't allow her to pull her hand away. Just like that, they held hands and looked into her eyes. Things in America can't be explained in a few words, but you have to believe that from the beginning to the end, I only have you, Jin-won, as my woman. Although my past can't be considered a blank piece of paper, no woman has ever left a mark on it that shouldn't have. I'm your husband. I am now, will be, and will always be. Jinwan's expression still didn't soften. I'm not a domineering and unreasonable woman. I don't even care about your past and your past. I'm very realistic, so I only look at the present and what's in front of me. But the person who I've always ignored and didn't even consider deeply has challenged my bottom line again and again. She keeps trying to find a sense of existence in me. I can't tolerate it. I know. Mo Jingshan held her hand. I'll deal with it. How to deal with it? Up until now, she didn't even know who the person hiding in the dark was. Jinwan took a deep breath, suppressed her emotions and said coldly in a low voice, I have a headache. I'm going back to my room to sleep. With that, she suddenly stood up from the sofa and forcefully pulled her hand out of his grasp. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the direction of the bedroom without looking back. Mo Jingshan could see that she was really angry. She was just restraining herself and did not explode. However, it was clear that she wanted to be alone and did not want to talk to him. She did not want to talk to him at all. Jinwan directly entered the bedroom and slammed the door shut with a pung sound. She recalled the blood-stained wedding dress doll from last time and the thrilling events from last night. She wished she could dig 3 feet into the ground to find the woman hiding in the dark. Did she want to steal my man? Come on, if you have the ability, just fight me face to face. What's the purpose of hiding in the back and messing around? To drive a wedge between us? Or to make her restless? To do these things again and again to challenge her bottom line? Did he think she would be afraid? She knew she should be more rational now. She couldn't push Mo Jingshan away at this time. Otherwise, as Xia Tian had warned her, this piece of meat would be taken away without her knowing. But right now she was really angry. Chapter 205. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Jinwan did not reply. She sat on the bed, holding her breath as she thought to herself. Forget it, forget it. This piece of meat was covered in gold. It was too precious and hard to guard. Whoever wanted to take it away could do so. She didn't want it anymore, all right? The door was knocked several more times. After a few seconds of silence, the man's calm voice rang out. Wan. Jinwan laid on the bed, covering her face with the blanket. She was unwilling to hear his voice. Mo Jingshan knew that she had locked the door from the inside. His hand futilely twisted the doorknob. He softly said, Wan, open the door. Jinwan did not make a sound. She buried herself in the blanket and used a silent method to respond. This woman's temper came as she pleased. There was no way Mo Jingshan would allow her to lock herself in the room like this. His tone became much harsher. Jinwan, open the door. Hearing his heavy tone, Jinwan abruptly sat up from the bed. She resisted the urge to throw the pillow against the door. I'm not opening it. My head hurts. I want to be alone. If you have a headache, go to the hospital. Why did you lock yourself up? Open the door. The man's voice was low and heavy. His tone was clearly colder. I'm not opening it. I'm not going anywhere. I want to sleep. Jinwan. Mo Jingshan, I don't want to talk to you right now. Do you want to open the door yourself, or do I have to open it? Jinwan remembered that last night in the bar's basement, he had kicked open the sturdy door. He had many ways to open the door. She was indeed unable to stop him. She hugged the blanket and laid on the bed unmoving. She decided not to speak. Let him do as he pleased. After all, he was the one who bought this condominium. If he wanted to kick it, he could. After a moment of silence, Jinwan suddenly remembered that since he was the one who bought this condominium, he most likely had the keys to every room in this condominium. Thinking of this, she abruptly sat up and ran off the bed. She rummaged through the table and drawers by the bed, and finally found the bedroom key in the drawer at the bottom of the bedside table. Seeing that the key was not in his hands, Jinwan finally relaxed. She placed the key back into the drawer and returned to the bed to continue covering herself with the blanket. Originally, she was just acting in a fit of pique, but after a while, she fell asleep under the quilt. When she woke up again, it was already evening. The sunset hung in the distant sky, and the room was a little dark. She got up and glanced at the door that was still closed. Mo Jingshan actually did not come in. Moreover, there was no sound outside at all. Did he go out? Or did he simply fly back to High City out of anger after being ignored by her? She slept for a few hours. And in these few hours, anything was possible. Jinwan sat on the bed for a while and listened carefully for any movements outside. There really was no sound. She abruptly lifted the covers and got off the bed. She walked to the door and pressed her ear against it to listen again. The entire apartment was so quiet that it was as if she was the only one there. Jinwan opened the locked bedroom door. She slowly opened a gap and saw something on the ground in front of the door. She paused and couldn't see clearly, so she opened the door further. Just at the moment when the bedroom door was completely opened, as if everything had its own switch, the dim room in the evening suddenly lit up, especially the light in the living room, which set off the roses on the floor particularly eye-catching. A large area in the middle of the living room was filled with roses, and the heart-shaped flower path in the middle was even more unique. Even in this heart-shaped flower path, there were even 21 cakes. The first cake was white, representing the pure white and flawless angel when she was 1 year old. Then the color of the cakes gradually deepened, from white to pink to red, until the 21st cake, was red, representing marriage. Jinwan stood stiffly in front of the door, so busy throwing a tantrum that she even forgot that today was her birthday. Moreover, it had been too long since she had a birthday, and this kind of birthday atmosphere was particularly strange to her. The whole room could only see the rose path and the huge heart-shaped cakes. She raised her eyes and looked around, but did not see Mo Jingshan. She walked out of the door. As soon as she passed the first white cake, she suddenly saw a burst of bright fireworks in the sky outside the window. Jinwan stared blankly out of the window and took another step forward uncontrollably. When she passed the second cake, there was another burst of fireworks outside the window. She looked out of the window as she walked, until the last cake. Because it was heart-shaped, she walked back to the starting point, at the bottom of the heart-shaped cake. As soon as she stepped on the last red cake, there were no more fireworks outside the window. Instead, on the balcony outside the French windows, a light slowly lit up. A man in a white shirt stood there. There was a fire in his hands and fireworks that had not yet been set off by his feet. Jinwan was stunned, subconsciously rushed over, and opened the French windows. "Looking for me?" Mo Jingshan glanced at her with a calm smile, and the torch in his hand lit the unlit fireworks. Even when the bright and beautiful fireworks exploded in front of her, Jinwan was still looking at the man standing in the fireworks. She stood there unmoving. It was as though the entire Tea City was about to be shaken by this sudden rain of fireworks. Meanwhile, the person whose birthday was actually being celebrated stood there like a fool, staring blankly. She did not even know when Mo Jingshan walked over. She only knew that the man held her hand and planted a light kiss on it, saying softly, "1-year-old Jinwan, happy birthday." Before Jinwan could react, the man had already hugged her and planted a kiss on her forehead. 2-year-old Jinwan, happy birthday. Jinwan. 3-year-old Jinwan, happy birthday. 4-year-old Jinwan, happy birthday. He kissed her hands, her face, her nose, the space between her eyebrows, her forehead, her ears, her cheeks, and so on. 20-year-old Jinwan, happy birthday. When she was about to say 21 years old, the man finally planted a kiss on her lips. He did not move away but pressed his lips against hers, saying softly, 21-year-old Mrs. Mo, happy birthday. With that, he abruptly pushed Jinwan, who was still absent-minded, against the glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. This kiss was not as light as the previous ones. Instead, it seemed to be full of possessiveness and aggression, imprisoning her firmly between the window and his chest. The kiss became deeper and deeper. When Jinwan came back to herself, she raised her hand to block his chest, but he held her back, and his tongue, which had already invaded her body, drilled deeper into her body. Jinwan could not push him away. She opened her eyes and abruptly bit down on his lips. Although it was not a heavy bite, the man paused and lowered his eyes to look at her. Jinwan wanted to say that she was still angry, but she could not say it. Chapter 206. However, the man in front of her stared at her. His deep, black eyes were filled with traces of a smile. His smile was seductive, as though he was a pervert who brought disaster to the world. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he leaned down to press his lips against hers. There was no further entanglement. Instead, he licked her lips inch by inch, filling the air with ambiguity. Finally releasing her lips, he held her waist, preventing her from turning her head away. He said in a low and hoarse voice, "Even if I'm angry, my birthday still has to be celebrated. If I don't give you a proper explanation before midnight, won't I have another baseless accusation?" Jin-won looked at his innocent appearance and pushed him angrily. "I'm not that unreasonable." "That's right. You're very reasonable. Yesterday, you acted as a hero saving a damsel in distress. Today, you dare to lock me outside the door in? That's because you weren't honest with me." Jin-won forcefully slapped his hand away from her face. Although she was clearly moved, she still had to hold back her anger. Right now, her expression was indescribable. It was likely that it was slightly twisted, but she could not be bothered to hide it. However, she was no match for his strength. Jin-won had already been brought into the floor-to-ceiling window. The window was not closed. She tried to push his hand away, but the man placed a knife in her hand. "Jin-won, cut the cake or just cut me. Choose one." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild, but his gaze was indifferent as he watched her. It was clear that he had already seen through her thoughts. "Aren't you still angry? Or do you want to cut?" He leaned over, leaning in front of her face to look at her expression. "The door is already closed, and you've held back your anger for too long. Rather than having a cold war by yourself, why don't you cut me a few times? I saw that you cut me very cleanly last night. Do you want to continue venting your anger today?" Jin-won gripped the knife tightly, glaring at him. The feeling of punching cotton was truly an internal injury. "Who says I want to have a cold war with you? I'm not that bored." Jin-won abruptly turned around, picked up a cake on the ground and cut it. She then picked up the cake and put it on the table by the side. After cutting it several times, she picked up another one and continued to cut it. From beginning to end, she did not look up at her again. Mo Jingshan stood by the side watching her. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that she was using the same strength she used to cut him to cut the cake. The pung-pung sounds indicated that she was indeed in a bad mood. He didn't say anything and handed her the cake for her to cut. After cutting one, he passed her another. After cutting for a long time, Jin-won was tired. She turned to see that there were still a few intact ones on the ground. Mo Jingshan picked up another one and handed it to her. She stood there with the knife covered in cream in her hand. The man looked at her with clear eyes, and his eyes were filled with the indulgence that belonged to her. For a moment, Jin-won didn't know what she was angry about. He had clearly explained to her that even if his past couldn't be considered a blank piece of paper, no woman had ever left a mark on it that shouldn't have. His words were already clear enough. What else did she want him to say? Jin-won didn't know why she was so angry with him. Was it because his past in Los Angeles had been provoking her? Did this mean that the other party had succeeded in provoking her? She suddenly rubbed between her brows. She didn't think whether her jealousy was really unreasonable. She threw the knife away and went to the bathroom to wash her hands, washing away the cream on her hands. At this moment the doorbell rang. Jin-won slowly washed her hands and saw Mo Jingshan open the door. Nan-hung came in. Seeing the mess on the floor and Mo Jingshan's white shirt more or less stained with cream, he sneered coldly. "Did you guys just go through a cream war? Or did you just unlock some new postures on so many cakes?" Jin-won didn't have time to think about why Nan-hung suddenly came to T-City. His words made her ears burn. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at Nan-hung, and then at Jin-won, who was still standing in the bathroom washing her hands. He spoke, his voice gentle and ordinary. "Your body is covered in cream. Go back to the bedroom and change your clothes after washing." Nan-hung looked at the gauze on Jin-won's head and the slightly swollen side of her face. His gaze was no longer as ordinary. "You were so heavy-handed. Didn't you crush that bastard's family jewels on the spot?" Nan-hung sneered, but his expression was clearly much colder. Jin-won paused and calmly glanced at him. Could it be that Nan-hung was here because of the underground bar incident? Or was it related to that person in America? Before I could make a move, That person was already crippled by Feng Ling. Mo Jingxin's extremely cold voice interrupted Jin Wan's thoughts. He looked at her. Go back to the room and change your clothes. That person was not only crippled by Feng Ling, but Jin Wan also almost killed him with her own hands. Wasn't that even more bloody? Jin Wan knew that Nan Heng was in the arms business, and she also knew that his relationship with both the underworld and the underworld was not simple. The reason why Nan Heng came here was most likely because the people who were dealt with last night were all from T-City's underground bar. Perhaps there was some connection between them. Jin Wan did not wish to hear any more about those people from last night. She glanced at them, wiped her hands, and went back to the bedroom. Seeing Jin Wan step into the bedroom with the cake and mess on the floor, Nan Heng felt that Jin Wan seemed to be angry today. Although she didn't say it, when she closed the bedroom door, she made a loud noise. Nan Heng raised his brows, looking at Mo Jingxin with an indifferent expression. What's the matter? Did you manage to save her and release her temper? Mo Jingxin ignored him. He casually unbuttoned his shirt and calmly asked, What happened in Los Angeles? What happened? Isn't it obvious? Because of your pressure, Elder Su locked his precious granddaughter up at home. Su Shui was merely used by that person. She dared to come to the country to cause trouble. She is indeed courageous. But it's not like you don't know what kind of power the Su family is relying on. Nan Heng spread his hands. But speaking of which, are you really willing to do it? That person guarded you for an entire year, while you were still recovering from your injuries. There seemed to be an undercurrent surging in the air. Mo Jingxin's usually gentle face revealed a biting sharpness. His tone was cold and heavy. If it wasn't for my father's interference back then, taking advantage of the time when I was unconscious to plant such a person by my side, I wouldn't have mistaken her for my savior. Otherwise, why do you think she had the opportunity to guard me for an entire year? Chapter 207. When Nan Heng arrived, it was already evening. When Jin Wan came out of the room, she saw that Nan Heng had yet to leave. Thus, she casually asked Nan Heng if he wanted to stay for dinner. In the end, this great sir actually agreed. At that time, Jin Wan glanced at the unclean cake on the floor and the mess. She wondered if there was no need for her to be so polite to Mo Jingxin's two brothers. That night, Nan Heng looked at the takeout on the table, his lips twitching. So, the last time you went to Old Chin's place, you personally made a sumptuous meal, and now that you're here, you can only eat takeout? Mo Jingxin tossed the disposable chopsticks to him, indifferently saying, Do I look like I have the leisure to make you a sumptuous meal right now? Nan Heng raised his brows, turning his gaze to the Jin Wan who had now become a good wife. Jin Wan pushed her long hair to the side, showing him the gauze on her forehead. She used a casual tone like Mo Jingxin's to say, Do I look like I have the ability to make you a sumptuous meal right now? Nan Heng. Nan Heng snorted, breaking the disposable chopsticks with a paw sound. He did not waste any words and directly tasted the food, raising his brows. Fine, it's my fault for not coming at the right time and place. Thankfully, this hotel's chef skills are not bad. It's barely edible. This was T-City's most famous hotel. It was said that the dishes were famous in the country. Yet at Nan Heng's place it was barely edible? Jin Wan also picked up her chopsticks. After taking a bite, she felt that this man was the one who said one thing, but meant another. It was clearly so delicious. She had just sat down when she saw that Mo Jingxin had also come over. She paused and subconsciously began to add food to Nan Heng's bowl. Come, eat more. She kept piling food into Nan Heng's bowl. Nan Heng watched speechlessly as the food gradually piled up into a small mountain, suspecting that something was wrong with Jin Wan's brain. Her man was just sitting by the side. Why was she adding food to his bowl? Was she purposely trying to disgust her man? Nan Heng picked up the bowl that was piled high and glanced meaningfully at Mo Jingxin. Sure enough, he saw Mo Jingxin sitting there with an indifferent expression, as though he couldn't wait for him to finish eating and leave. Last time on your birthday, I cut your cake and ate so much. Today is my birthday, so I should return the favor. You can cut whatever you like. Jin Wan put the knife in front of Nan Heng. and piled the only 4 cakes that survived out of the 21 on the table. Although it was a gradient, the last few cakes were pink to red, and they were all very bright colors. Nan Heng took a look at Jinwan, picked up the knife with a faint smile, and casually pointed at the 4 cakes. Finally, he looked at the last big red cake, and the pair of dolls in wedding suits made of black, white, and red chocolate. He picked up the knife, and was about to cut it from the middle. Try cutting it. Mo Jingshan's tone did not change. When he spoke, his expression was indifferent as he coldly stared at Nan Heng. Nan Heng raised his brows and sneered. Jinwan said I can cut it as I please. Mo Jingshan's gaze casually shifted to the other 3 cakes, meaning that if he wanted to cut it, he would cut the other 3. If he dared to cut this cake with dolls, he would definitely not live to see the sun tomorrow morning. Nan Heng sneered and put down the knife. Fine, I'm not the birthday boy. Besides, I'm really not interested in things like cakes. Oh, Jinwan indifferently responded. What a coincidence. I'm also not interested in cakes recently. Nan Heng smiled mockingly. If you really don't want to eat it, I'll throw it away for you when I leave. Before he finished speaking, Mo Jingshan directly picked up the mouth of a fish from the takeaway box and threw it into his bowl, saying coldly, Eat. Nan Heng looked at the fingernail-sized fish mouth in his bowl. Did he want him to shut up? He suppressed his laughter. Your woman doesn't plan to eat this cake at all. It's clear that the 2 of us are not interested in sweets. If you don't throw this cake away, are you going to keep it at home and seal it as a fossil? Mo Jingshan raised his eyes and said coldly and indifferently, Do you have a problem with me keeping it as a fossil? Don't care about him. Eat more. Jinwan suddenly picked up all kinds of delicious food and put it into Nan Heng's bowl. She raised her voice and interrupted. What else do you like to eat? I'll help you pick it up. Nan Heng looked at Jinwan's expression with a forced smile and did not say more. Even though he did not usually like to eat meat, he still gave her face and ate some of the food in his bowl. He gave Jinwan another look. It went without saying that she dared to throw a tantrum with Mo Jingshan, but he did not have the ability to pick a fight with Mo Jingshan here. It was possible for him to cooperate with her and make things difficult for Mo Jingshan. The result was that Nan Heng was chased out before he could finish his bowl of rice that was piled up like a mountain. Before he could eat his fill, he was almost disemboweled by Mo Jingshan's cold dagger. As if this was not enough, he even had to clean up the unfinished takeout box. In the end, Mo Jingshan even added a cold word. Scram. TSK. He finally understood what Qin's sighting meant when he said they were going to torture him to the point of Stockholm Syndrome. It was indeed quite King inhumane. Tomorrow was Monday. Logically speaking, Jinwan should return to T University to continue her classes. However, Mo Jingshan did not seem to have any intention of returning to High City. It was likely that she would be resting in the condo tomorrow. Jinwan sat on the bed in the bedroom, holding a business management textbook in her hands. She planned to roughly read through the contents of Professor Lin's lecture tomorrow. The spacious bed was soft, and the temperature in the room was adjusted. Although T-City hadn't entered winter yet, there was the sound of wind blowing tonight. Compared to the sound of the wind outside the window, this moment of silence actually gave one a sense of tranquility and security. Whether the true sense of security came from the warmth of this room, or from the man living in this condo with her, she could not be bothered to think about it. The man pushed the door open and entered, breaking the silence in the room. His long legs took steady steps as he walked towards her without saying a word. The woman who was reading on the bed raised her head. Her expression was calm, and the unhappiness from before was gone. Her voice was light and emotionless. I'm returning to T University to attend classes tomorrow. The man furrowed his brows, coldly replying, No. Chapter 208. Although Jinwan's voice was calm, it clearly hid a hint of toughness. After she finished speaking, she lowered her head and continued flipping through the book. After turning a page, she said in a normal tone, Then let's book a plane ticket back to High City. I'll go back with you. I'm not going to study anymore. After I recover, I'll stay behind you and be an idle rich wife. Anyway, you don't lack money. Even if I casually take out a few $100 million, or even a few billion to blindly invest, and lose a few $100 million every day, you can still afford to squander like this. If you really want to lose, go ahead. I can indeed afford to raise you. Mo Jingshan did not mind at all the sarcasm in her words. Instead, her fists landed on cotton, causing her to feel strangely irritated. Oh. Jinwan forcefully squeezed out a cold word from her mouth. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at the side of her face that was still slightly red and swollen. Although it had mostly subsided, it would still take at least a day for it to completely disappear. He took the book from her hands. When Jinwan raised her eyes to look at him, he said, "Be good, don't be angry. If your face is not swollen tomorrow morning, I'll let you return to T University." As he spoke, the man's hand caressed her face. Looking at the red and swollen side, his eyes clearly flashed with coldness. Jinwan turned her face away to avoid his touch. She lifted the blanket to cover her legs and moved to lie down. "Then I'm going to sleep. More rest will help reduce the swelling." However, before she could lie down, the man abruptly pulled her out of the bed. Jinwan had just struggled when she was pulled into his arms by the bedside. "What do you want to hear?" He held her and did not let her move away. When Jinwan raised her eyes to glare at him, his dark eyes watched her. "About everything that happened to me in America? Or about that so-called fiancé you've heard of in Los Angeles? Do you think I'm not honest enough with you? Or did I say something that touched your bottom line and angered you to this extent?" Jinwan felt that she did not have the right to ask Mo Jingshan to be completely honest with her. Besides, those were indeed things that happened before their marriage. She was well aware of how he treated her. In the past, she had sworn that no matter how many women Mo Jingshan had, in her eyes, they were all failures. But when she really wanted to understand, she found that she was actually a ridiculously narrow-minded woman. He said that no woman had left a mark on his piece of white paper. Whether there was a mark or not was secondary. The key was that such a woman did exist in Los Angeles. Jinwan was very clear about Mo Jingshan's attitude, so it was meaningless for her to haggle over this. Did she leave a mark on his paper? Or was it just that she was his wife in this marriage? His love and pampering for her seemed to have coexisted from the first day of their marriage. Everything seemed to be so natural. What about the marks? Did she stay? Mo Jingshan often looked gentle, but Jinwan knew very well that he was cold-hearted to those who had nothing to do with him. No one could easily influence any of his decisions and choices, whether it was his enemies in the business world or the women who tried to approach him. Anyone who tried to do anything to him was like hitting a stone with an egg. Jinwan felt that she had been so sheltered under his wings that she couldn't tell the direction. She was indeed under his wings, but how far was this position from his heart? In fact, it was good for her to keep calm and look at things from the perspective of a bystander. Otherwise, once he got serious, it would be the most terrible. Seeing that she didn't speak for a long time, but her eyes suddenly seemed to inadvertently glance at his chest, where his heart was. Mo Jingshan pinched her chin hard, reminding her to come back to herself. "Jinwan, speak." Jinwan came back to herself, raised her eyes, and saw that the man was patiently gazing into her eyes. "How can I not be angry, Anne?" he coaxed in a low voice. Jinwan was also wondering why she was angry. Originally, she should have asked him why he got engaged to that woman in America, why he left America, and why he married her not long after returning to High City. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, they became, "If I didn't ask you to return to the U Garden a few months ago, if I didn't say I wanted to live a good life with you, if I didn't continue to make trouble every day for the sake of divorce, and if I really listened to Mungran's advice to commit suicide at home, if it really came to that, you would agree to divorce me, right?" Hearing her so-called assumption, Mo Jingshan's eyes instantly turned as dark as ink, and his gaze became much colder. "Once you return to America after the divorce, you'll definitely have women like In Shuyen and Ji Mengran by your side, not to mention your ex-fiancé in Los Angeles. I'm saying if you don't have me, who will you choose to spend the rest of your life with?" Although she knew that once she said these words, Mo Jingshan would definitely feel that there was a big problem, but she still asked him, America. These two words had always tugged at the most sensitive nerves of her two lives. She did not want to touch it, but she could not hold it in. The man's gaze was dark as he watched her. It was like the deep sea that had been splashed with ink, boundless and filled with the freshness of the sea breeze. He suddenly let go of her arm, releasing her from his embrace. Jin-Wan had yet to react, when Mo Jingshan had already placed her on the bed. He expressionlessly stood up, speaking mildly. I'll go get an ice pack. Apply more cold compress on your face tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll ask Feng Ling to accompany you to T University. After speaking, the man turned and left the bedroom. Jin-Wan was stunned. What did this mean? She sat on the bed and thought for a moment before realizing that he seemed angry. Wasn't she the one who was originally angry? Why did it suddenly turn to him? For some reason, Jin-Wan's heart suddenly felt a little flustered. She had been by Mo Jingshan's side for so long. Outside of work, although he was still cold and indifferent in general, he was exceptionally gentle and indulgent toward her. He could be described as absolutely easy to get along with. Occasionally, he would be stern toward her, but it would always be a light warning. He would always give in to her. Unlike how he treated other people, Mo Jingshan would never say a single harsh word to her. Mo Jingshan had never been truly angry toward her. Today was the first time. She was not even sure if her earlier assumption had caused him to sense something or arouse his suspicions, or if the strange assumption she made regarding the divorce and who he would choose in America had touched his bottom line. He couldn't possibly be suddenly angry, right? Chapter 209. This was the first Cold War in a long time. Jin-Wan resisted the urge to go out and take a look. She shut herself in the bedroom and refused to step out. The next morning, she took a shower in the bathroom. She saw that the scar on her face was almost unnoticeable. She only needed to put on a layer of foundation to hide it. Only the gauze on her forehead was slightly noticeable. She planned to find a nearby hairdresser to cut her fringe to cover it. Anyway, her hair was of good quality and grew quickly. When the scar on her forehead gradually faded, her fringe would grow back. It would not affect her appearance at all. The living room was quiet. Jin-Wan changed her clothes and walked out. The moment she opened the bedroom door, she was met with a pair of eyes. Mo Jingshan met her gaze calmly. He sat in the living room. It seemed like he had not slept all night. Jin-Wan stood by the door and watched him. He did not seem to have any intention of making a sound. If Jin-Wan had not come out and seen him, who knew how long he would have sat here? Facing Mo Jingshan, the atmosphere was so heavy that she instinctively held her breath. At this moment, Feng Ling opened the door and entered. Clearly, she had received Mo Jingshan's notice to send Jin-Wan back to T University today. However, the moment Feng Ling entered, she sharply sensed the undercurrent between the two of them. She stood by the door in a daze, and was about to turn to leave when Mo Jingshan called her back. Send her to T University. Feng Ling paused and could only turn back. She saw that Jin-Wan had already changed. Although there was a wound on her forehead, she seemed to be in good condition. However, the living room was eerily quiet. In the end, Feng Ling spoke up. Madam, Mr. Mo has arranged a temporary transfer for me in T University's business department. From today onwards, I can follow you around in school. Don't worry. I'll do my best to keep a low profile. I won't let others know that I'm your bodyguard and won't affect your normal life. Temporary transfer? Then you'll live with me in T University? Jin-Wan looked at Feng Ling, hearing that Jin-Wan still planned to live in school and not return to the condo. Feng Ling subconsciously turned to Mo Jingshan, who was sitting on the sofa. The man on the sofa did not speak, as though their conversation had nothing to do with him. I'll follow wherever you live, Feng Ling replied. Jin-Wan did not speak again. Her eyes seemed to inadvertently drift toward the sofa. In the past, Jin-Wan didn't understand. People always said that Mo Jingshan was a noble creature who could freeze people to death just by sitting there quietly. She always felt that it was an exaggeration. She admitted that he was cold and noble, but it was too exaggerated to say that he could freeze people to death in an instant. How could he be so scary? But now, Mo Jingshan only sat there and did not say a word, but Jin-Wan could deeply feel She had really offended him last night. Those inexplicable hypotheses seemed to have inadvertently touched his reverse scale. He felt as if he had plucked the fur off a tiger's head. Was what he said yesterday too much? She looked at him and was about to speak when she heard Emo Jingshan's phone ring. He picked up the call and did not look at her again. Countless words were stuck in her throat. Jinwon really wanted to say that she did not mean it that way last night. Divorce and questioning were all her hypotheses. She had been out of her mind to cause trouble on the birthday that he had meticulously planned for him. She wanted to apologize, but after trying for a long time, as she watched his cold back view as he stood up to answer the call, she could not say a single word. After all, her anger yesterday was just a simple matter of being a little jealous and throwing a tantrum with him. But Emo Jingshan was really angry. She was just relying on the fact that he had always given in to her. That moment of incoherence had caused her to be caught unprepared. I still have matters to attend to at the company. I have to return to High City today. When Emo Jingshan put down the phone, he turned back to see that Jinwon had not left. He lowered his head to look at his watch, his tone calm and unperturbed. Have Fengling send you to T University before 8. If you want to stay in the dormitory, that's fine. I'll have someone pack up your luggage and send it to the dormitory. If you really don't want to stay in this condo, since it's already under your name, you can rent it or sell it. Are you leaving now? Jinwon held it in, but still blurted out. Emo Jingshan looked at her. Jinwon thought that he would at least say something. But in the end, the man did not say anything. He picked up his jacket and turned to leave. Mrs. Mo, it's almost time for Professor Lin's class. Fengling saw that Jinwon clearly wanted to chase after him to apologize, but was still holding it in. She comforted her and said, Mr. Emo must have some matters to attend to at the company, so he went back today. When he finds some time in the next few days, he will definitely come to see you. Seeing that Jinwon did not respond, Fengling asked patiently, Do you want to go eat breakfast first? Jinwon focused and turned to the kitchen. She took out the cake and cut it while saying, No need. There's still so much cake. I'll eat some, and then go to T University. Fengling looked at the cake and asked in surprise, Why are there only 4 left? Jinwon paused and raised her eyes to look at her. Do you know how many cakes there were here yesterday? I do. On Saturday night, I saw Mr. Mo come. I was surprised at first, but I later learned that he arrived that morning and flew over from High City overnight. He specially booked a nearby bakery and spent the whole day making 21 cakes of different sizes and colors for you. Yesterday, I sent the cakes and roses over with the bakery's staff. Fengling saw that Jinwon's figure seemed to have been petrified and realized that she had said something she shouldn't have. She immediately stopped talking. On Friday night, he flew over from High City. On Saturday night, he brought her back from the bar and took care of her for an entire night. On Sunday night, he angered her to the point that he could not sleep. In other words, he had not slept for 3 whole days. Jinwon did not speak. She cut open the reddest cake and gently picked up the pair of chocolate figurines on top. She placed them on a plate and carefully placed them there without eating. Seeing that Jinwon had suddenly lowered her head to eat the cake, Fengling approached. Mrs. Mo, did you quarrel with Mr. Mo? However, the moment she approached, she saw that Jinwon's eyes were red as she ate the cake with her head lowered. Fengling was usually a serious and cold person. When she saw that Jinwon, who had never shed a single tear, had her eyes red as though she was about to cry but was holding it in, Fengling immediately panicked. Afraid that she would really cry, Fengling frantically passed her tissues to her. Jinwon shook her head and avoided Fengling's hand. I'm fine. Then should I send you to T University now? Chapter 210. All right. Fengling glanced at her once more before retreating. Jinwon recalled how she had cut the cake into pieces yesterday, and how Emo Jingshan had passed it to her. Her heart felt as though it had been stung by bees. Right now, her emotions were complicated and indescribable. All sorts of feelings welled up in her heart. She wished she could rush to the airport right now to look for Emo Jingshan, but when she recalled how he did not even spare her a glance earlier, Her heart felt as though it had been stung by 100 bees. After Feng Ling sent Jinwan to T University, Jinwan kept considering whether she should return to High City. In the afternoon, Mo Jingshan should have already landed in High City. She felt even more anxious, and her mind wandered off for a long time during class. After class in the evening, a sudden rainstorm wreaked havoc in T City, causing the airport to be temporarily closed. All flights that night were delayed. Jinwan had no choice but to temporarily give up on her plans to return to High City. She wanted to calm her restless heart and wait for Mo Jingshan to cool down before returning. That night, the moment Jinwan returned to the dormitory, she saw that Su Xue's bed was already empty. Ling Feifei had placed her luggage on the empty bed, intending to use it as her spare bed. Jinwan, where have you been these past 2 days? Ling Feifei sat by the bed, applying skincare and wiping her face while glancing at Jinwan through the mirror. Jinwan did not reply. "Aya, you cut your bangs?" Ling Feifei asked again before turning to look at Jinwan seriously. Bai Wei also glanced at Jinwan. "It's quite pretty. Jinwan, you already have the beauty of a fairy. Your skin is also good, and after cutting your bangs, you look like an underage high school student. Aren't you afraid of being abducted?" Hearing these words, Ling Feifei, who had always claimed that her beauty was not inferior to Jinwan's, immediately became unhappy. "Jinwan's looks are only SOSO. Isn't it too much to praise her as a fairy?" Bai Wei ignored Ling Feifei's words. Seeing that Jinwan had been quiet ever since she entered, as though she had something on her mind, she decided to keep quiet and did not disturb her. "Aya, by the way, Jinwan, you haven't been around these past 2 days. You don't know what happened to Su Xue, right?" Ling Feifei's mouth seemed unable to stop moving, as she suddenly brought up another topic. Jinwan looked at her and asked even though she already knew the answer. "What happened to her?" "Well, didn't you see that everything on the bed is gone?" Ling Feifei glanced at the bed that Su Xue was sleeping on. "I don't know what happened. Yesterday, many police officers suddenly came to T University. At the time, no one saw what happened. However, that very night, Su Xue suddenly left. It seemed like she had taken a leave of absence from school. Not even a shadow of her was seen. She disappeared without a trace. Professor Lin didn't tell us the reason either. Afterward, the dormitory's belongings were also removed. It was as though she had never entered T University before." Jinwan glanced at the empty bed next to her. "Isn't Su Xue on good terms with you? Do you know why she left?" Ling Feifei stared at Jinwan with a gossipy expression. She could not wait to interrogate her for some information. "You clearly know that Jinwan won't be around these 2 days. Why are you asking so much? How could she possibly know? She and Su Xue haven't known each other for that long." Bai Wei said indifferently. Ling Feifei snorted. She disliked how Bai Wei always spoke against her. The 3 of them in this dormitory were completely from different worlds. After Su Xue left, would her bed be unoccupied? Hopefully no one else would come. Otherwise, she would have no place to store her belongings. 8 in the evening. Ling Feifei was just about to place her belongings on the bed when Feng Ling appeared in front of the dormitory door. The 3 women stared at the short-haired woman who had suddenly appeared in the dormitory. Jinwan was actually quite surprised. She did not expect that Feng Ling would directly move into her dormitory. Did she really plan on being inseparable 24 hours a day? Had the incident that night scared Feng Ling out of her mind? When Bai Wei heard that a new temporary transfer student would be arriving today, she was not too surprised. However, she was still intimidated by Feng Ling's aura. Ling Feifei originally glanced at the door disapprovingly. She saw that Feng Ling was dressed in a black lady's t-shirt, black jeans, and black leather boots. She was only carrying a black travel bag. She did not look like a daughter from an illustrious family who had received proper upbringing. She was especially disapproving and did not even plan on giving up the bed opposite her. "Why is there another one?" Ling Feifei said mockingly. "Why does Professor Lin accept just anyone? It's fine if she's the manager of a small studio. But now, even female gangsters from the underworld can learn business management from Professor Lin? Don't speak so much. Is there a need for you to comment on what kind of students Professor Lin accepts?" Bai Wei frowned and reprimanded her. Ling Feifei rolled her eyes toward the door. In any case, our dormitory is already full. This bed can't be emptied either. Go live in another dormitory. She's definitely here because of Professor Lin's arrangements. Why are you trying to coax her? Bai Wei really could not stand her. Bai Wei, why are you always rebuking me? Can't you see that I have so much luggage that I don't have anywhere to put it? Ling Feifei was unhappy. Bai Wei smiled coldly. I can't stand it. Who cares if you can't stand it or not? In any case, this bed is mine. 3 people are enough for this dormitory. I have to speak to Professor Lin. He can't let anyone else stay here. Ling Feifei appeared to be unwilling to give up the bed no matter what. Feng Ling coldly glanced at her. Jinwan was still wondering if she would be able to adapt to living in such a dormitory. She wondered if she should just return to the condo with Feng Ling. At this moment, Feng Ling walked in. She placed the black travel bag in her hands on Su Xue's bed. Just as Ling Feifei abruptly stood up and was about to ask her to take the bag away, she kicked the pink luggage off the bed. What are you doing? Ling Feifei was startled. She stared in disbelief at the various clothes that had fallen out of the luggage. She directly cursed with a shrill voice. You dare to kick my things? You've dirted my luggage and clothes. Can you afford to compensate me? You've taken up my bed and wasted my time. Can you afford to compensate me? Feng Ling coldly retorted. Under Ling Feifei's furious gaze, she sat down on the bed. Without even glancing at her, she only said coldly, Feng Ling, 23 years old. Since 200X, you've been the national martial arts champion for 3 consecutive years. You have a black belt in Taekwondo. Champion in Los Angeles in women's single combat. Coach of America's 11 base. Please advise me. The moment her words landed, the dormitory fell into a strange silence. Bai Wei and Ling Feifei stared at Feng Ling. Their eyes were about to fall out of their sockets. Ling Feifei appeared as though she had swallowed a fly. She could not say a single word. Chapter 211. As the saying went, evil people would be tortured by evil people. This was probably the logic. Ling Feifei was so angry that she abruptly got off the bed to pick up the luggage from the ground. She glared fiercely at Feng Ling's face, but the latter only glanced at her coldly. Ling Feifei immediately shrunk her shoulders and bit her lips. She unwillingly brought the luggage back to her own bed. Jinwan's smile was mild. She did not pay them any further attention and sat on the bed to read. However, it was as though she was in the day. She could not focus. The rain continued to pour outside. In order not to affect Jinwan's normal life in T University, Feng Ling did not take the initiative to greet her. Right now Ling Feifei and Bai Wei's attention was focused on her. Jinwan could sit quietly on the bed for a while. A black belt in Taekwondo is already very impressive. There's actually martial arts in shooting? Bai Wei looked at the black-dressed Feng Ling with some surprise and attempted to chat with her. Feng Ling indifferently glanced at her. She remembered that Jinwan had told her about the 2 roommates' situations and personalities. She nodded slightly at Bai Wei. She did not look at her coldly, nor was she overly warm. It could be considered a simple greeting. Ling Feifei sat by the bed and muttered softly. This is a female dormitory. Professor Lin actually allowed a tomboy to stay here. I'm starting to suspect her sexual orientation. In the future, even if I shower and change my clothes, I probably won't be able to return to the dormitory. Feng Ling appeared as though she did not hear anything. She kicked the trash can that had appeared by the bed aside. Whose is it? Take it. Ling Feifei turned to look, and her expression turned even more ashen. She was about to scold her when she raised her eyes to meet Feng Ling's gaze. She bit her lips harshly and angrily dragged the trash can that had almost been kicked over back to her bed. She unwillingly scolded softly, "Lunatic." The next day, due to the heavy rain yesterday, the weather was slightly chilly. After class, Jinwan returned to the apartment outside the school to retrieve her coat. Even before she opened the door, Jinwan still held on to a sliver of hope that Mo Jingxian might not have left yesterday. Perhaps he had changed to an afternoon flight and was also delayed in T-City by the heavy rain. After all, Mo Jingxian had never been angry with her. Perhaps he did not want to hold it against her for now, and thus ignored her. As long as she sincerely explained to him when they met again. The door was pushed open, and 2 suitcases were placed neatly in the living room. Other than that, there was no one else. Standing at the door, Jinwan's heart sank. Previously, he said that if she wanted to stay in the dormitory, he would order someone to pack her luggage and send it to her. It was up to her whether she wanted to rent or sell this apartment. He was indeed a man of his word. Her luggage should have already been packed yesterday, but because of the heavy rain, it was not delivered to her. Unwilling to give up, she searched every room again and found that all traces of Mo Jingshan's birthday celebration had been erased. The traces of fireworks on the balcony, the thick scent of cream wafting through the room, the uneaten cakes in the kitchen, and the chocolate doll she had carefully placed in the tray had all been taken away. Nothing was left. Jinwan silently sat on the sofa and looked at this room that was half familiar and half strange to her. The scene of Mo Jingshan accompanying her to watch television and pressing her against the window and kissing her 21 times suddenly seemed like a dream. The warm and comfortable apartment was only filled with the faint scent of air freshener. Everything made her feel distant and unfamiliar. Feng Ling was still waiting downstairs. Jinwan composed herself and carried the suitcase out alone. The suitcase was very heavy, and it took some effort to carry it. When she reached downstairs, Feng Ling saw the luggage in her hands and rushed over. "Mrs. Mo, my luggage. I don't know if the dormitory cabinets will be able to fit it," Jinwan calmly said. Feng Ling furrowed her brows. "Although Mr. Mo is angry with you, there's no need for you to make things so difficult for yourself. This apartment is under your name. It's fine if you leave your luggage here. There's no need to bring it all to the dormitory." Jinwan's bones were still somewhat stubborn. It was only now that she completely realized that Mo Jingshan was being serious with her. What exactly did I say to provoke him? Divorce? Or did she ask him who he would choose to spend the rest of his life with? Jinwan carried the suitcase to the car with some difficulty. Seeing that Jinwan was also a little stubborn after being provoked, Feng Ling helplessly glanced at her and turned to help her carry it. "No, I'll do it myself." Jinwan avoided her hand and carried the luggage into the car herself. Then Jinwan leaned against the car and panted for a while. There were only various tumbling emotions in her mind. In the end, she suddenly took out her cell phone and glanced at it. In the recent call history, she found Mo Jingshan's private cell phone number. After staring at it for a long time, she suddenly called him. However, after the call went through, the cell phone only beeped, and Jinwan's heart seemed to be shaken. She then turned to look at the suitcase in the car, and abruptly hung up the phone. Feng Ling watched from the side. Why did she feel that when Jinwan was calm and rational, everything was fine? But when she really encountered a problem, she was like a little woman who had just learned to fall in love. The first time she got angry, the first time she quarreled, she suddenly became disorganized, and she didn't know how to reconcile. Even she could tell that if Jinwan really called him right now and said a few words to him, Mr. Mo's anger would definitely be appeased. But clearly, this was only a bystander's view. Jinwan was lost in love and lost her direction. Although the phone only rang once, Jinwan was certain that the call went through. After about 10 minutes, her cell phone remained silent. There was no call back, nor was there any message. Feng Ling had already boarded the car. She saw that Jinwan was leaning against the car in a daze. "Mrs. Mo, are we still leaving? Let's go." Jinwan lowered her eyes, placed her cell phone in her pocket, and returned to the car. Feng Ling's hand was on the steering wheel. She turned to see that Jinwan's expression clearly showed that she was in a bad mood. "Are you sure you want to bring the luggage back to the dormitory? This condo, take it first. Even if the condo is under my name, I didn't buy it. Leave it empty first. We'll talk about it later." "Actually, Mrs. Mo, you and Mo can." "Feng Ling, my head hurts. I'm going to sleep for a while. Wake me up when we reach T University." Although she knew that T University was not far from here, and that it would only take a few minutes to drive, Jinwan still closed her eyes and leaned her head against the car window, no longer speaking. "Your head hurts again. Did you really get a concussion from the collision that day? Let's go to the hospital. Chapter 212. Haicheng, Emo Corporation. The executive meeting room went silent for a moment because of the short ringtone. Ever since CEO Emo returned from T-City, his entire being emitted a frightening coldness. Although he was not easy to talk to in the company, today, he was extremely difficult to talk to. No one dared to approach him for fear of losing their jobs. The meeting was proceeding in an orderly manner. Emo Jingshan sat in the seat of honor and listened to the reports of the executives with a cold expression. It was not until his cell phone on the table rang that his expressionless face changed slightly. However, he only took a glance at his cell phone. The ringtone was very short and almost stopped after one ring. Everyone in the conference room had personally witnessed the change in temperature from the coldest days of winter to the perennial ice and snow in the North Pole. It had always been cold, but right now it was so cold that it penetrated their hearts. Shinmu stood by Emo Jingshan's side and did not dare to speak. Earlier, he saw Emo Jingshan's phone light up. It was Jinwan's number. However, the strange thing was that CEO Emo did not make any movements to answer the call. The other party also hung up immediately. What situation was this? Could it be that they quarreled? CEO Emo, should we pause the meeting and return the call? Shinmu asked softly. No need. Continue. Emo Jingshan's tone was extremely mild. That night, at 8 o'clock, Jinwan packed up the things she had brought back from the condo. She did not pay attention to any of the questions in the room. Only Feng Ling remained silent as she watched Jinwan pack up. She could tell that Jinwan was clearly using the tiredness of packing to vent her emotions. Right now it was better for her to do her own things. By the time Jinwan finished packing and returned after taking a shower, it was already 9 o'clock. Nowadays, young people were used to staying up late. Ling Feifei tossed and turned on the bed, unable to sleep. She said, Professor Lin is really too strict. Usually he doesn't allow us to go out at night. He even arranged for security guards to stand guard outside our dormitory. Really, at night, even a fly can't fly out. I suspect that I'm not here to study but to enter a small prison. Professor Lin is being cautious. Everyone in the management class has a high status. They all have powerful families behind them. If something were to happen to anyone here, not only would Professor Lin's reputation be ruined, he wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility. Therefore, it's understandable that he doesn't allow us to leave school at night, Bai Wei replied. Ling Feifei made a tisk sound. This is too boring. This is our first time in T-City, and we don't even have the chance to eat the local delicacies. How about this? How about the four of us take turns to treat each other? This Saturday, I'll treat everyone. Sunday it'll be Bai Wei's treat. Next Saturday, it'll be Jinwan's treat, and the following Sunday, it'll be Feng Ling's. We can only find time on the weekends to eat, drink, and play. After Ling Feifei finished speaking, no one in the dormitory replied. As if to support herself, she said, then I'll take it as a silent agreement. It's settled then. Bai Wei lazily raised her head from the bed and asked, I see that you really came to T University to mess around. As expected, you don't put any effort into your studies. Ling Feifei pursed her lips. I'm also very attentive in class, all right? As she spoke, Ling Feifei glanced at Feng Ling. Look, Feng Ling is the one who doesn't put any effort into her studies. In class today, I noticed that she didn't pay much attention to Professor Lin's class. Even now, I haven't seen her take out her books to revise. If we're talking about slackers, isn't she worse than me? Feng Ling glanced at her indifferently. The moment Ling Feifei met her gaze, she subconsciously turned her head away, not daring to meet her gaze. She's a martial arts champion. What are you? Bai Wei chuckled. Ling Feifei did not speak. Her gaze suddenly shifted in Jinwan's direction. Feng Ling's martial arts skills truly caused others to shrink back. It was best not to provoke her. Bai Wei was an executive who had experienced many trials and tribulations in a large company. If they really wanted to compete in verbal skills, she could not compare to Feng Ling. On the other hand, this Jinwan always appeared quiet and unconcerned. I say, Jinwan, you spend the most time revising every day. What's the point? Isn't it just a small real estate studio? What big development can there be? No matter how much you learn, you'll only be able to manage tens of people. I feel that it's a waste of time for you to learn management from Professor Lin. Jinwan had originally planned to sleep. When she heard these words, she did not turn around to look at her. She only casually replied, a small studio is also a work organization. Good business management will have the same effect on a company with tens of thousands of people, or a studio with tens of people. I think what you should do is think of a way to hug onto someone's thigh and get them to invest tens of millions of yuan in your studio. It's more important to raise the standards of your own studio. Otherwise, how can such a small studio be presentable? At this moment, Feng Ling suddenly glanced at Ling Feifei coldly. Do you like to meddle in other people's business? Ling Feifei was confused. I meddle in Jinwan's business. What does it have to do with you? Long-winded. Feng Ling expressionlessly rolled her eyes. Right now it's time to rest. Maintain silence, understand? You. Ling Feifei abruptly sat up, glaring at her. However, Feng Ling coldly picked up her earphones and put them on. She did not even look at her. The dormitory was very quiet. No one paid her any attention. Ling Feifei wanted to throw a tantrum, but did not dare to direct it at Feng Ling. She then turned to look at Jinwan, who had yet to turn around. She felt that this cold and unapproachable Feng Ling was always faintly protecting Jinwan. She was only the person in charge of a small studio. She had no money, no power, and no background. Yet her popularity was actually quite good. The dormitory finally returned to silence. Jinwan closed her eyes for a moment. Although it was quiet, she could not fall asleep. She opened her eyes again. Today it was not raining outside. However, T-City's weather was indeed cold. The sound of the air conditioner in the dormitory was not loud. However, in such a quiet environment, it was especially obvious. The whooshing sound made it difficult for one to fall asleep. The lights in the dormitory were also turned off at 9:30 p.m. Jinwan picked up her phone in the darkness and opened the screen to take a look. There was still not a single call. There was not even a single text message. In the darkness, the brightness of the phone screen was slightly blinding. Jinwan opened up her recent call history and looked at the call she had made to Mo Jingxian in the morning. She was sure that she had really made the call. However, even now several hours had already passed. Her phone remained silent. She confirmed that her phone was not broken. She also sent a text message to check the balance of her phone, proving that it was still working. Jinwan pressed down on the screen to turn it off. Not long after, she turned it back on. She repeated this for a long time. Chapter 213. Jinwan's phone, which originally had quite a bit of battery, was constantly switched on and off until it ran out of battery. Although Feng Ling was wearing earphones, her gaze was focused on this side. She wanted to say something and have Jinwan call Mo Jingxian to stop this stalemate. However, seeing Jinwan's expression, she thought about it and decided not to say anything. On the weekend, Ling Feifei insisted on treating everyone to a meal. No matter how they tried to push it away, she insisted on treating everyone to a meal. She said that she wanted to build up their relationship. Even if it was only for 3 months, they could still be considered roommates. What do you want to eat? Ling Feifei saw that Bai Wei and Feng Ling were ignoring her and decided to hold Jinwan's arm to ask. Jinwan originally wanted to avoid her, but this Ling Feifei was too clingy. Furthermore, they would be living together for more than 2 months. No matter what, she did not want to make things too awkward on the surface. Thus, she did not move and casually said, "Anything is fine. Anything is fine. There's an Italian restaurant near T University. I heard that the boss is a famous chef with 3 Michelin stars. How about I treat you guys to that restaurant today?" "Sure. Anyway, you're treating. You can decide what to eat. I don't mind." Bai Wei was more casual. Feng Ling saw that Jinwan's attitude had always been very tolerant. She guessed that Jinwan had always treated Ling Feifei as a spoiled and immature young lady, and could not be bothered to fuss over it. She did not bother with these matters. Since Jinwan did not reject, Feng Ling could only casually reply, whatever. Seeing that everyone had agreed, Ling Feifei said, then it's settled. This time I'll treat you guys. There's no need to fight with me over the bill. Just do as I said earlier. We'll take turns. Next time, you guys can treat me to a better meal. After coming to T University, this was the first dormitory gathering. Although they were not too enthusiastic, they still gave each other some face. When Ling Feifei treated them, the Italian restaurant they went to cost about 1,000 yuan per person. The four of them spent more than 5,000 yuan. And this was after everyone allowed Ling Feifei to order whatever she wanted. They barely ate much, but it was already very expensive. The next day, Sunday, Bai Wei invited the guests back. She took them to another very famous sushi restaurant in T City. In recent years, sushi had become very popular within the country. The price and quality varied, but this place was indeed not bad. It was a high-end and luxurious restaurant, and the few of them spent $6,000 to $7,000. Every time they ate, Ling Feifei would be very lively. She would always try to find a topic to talk about, but no one would pay attention to her. She would always pick on Jinwan. After all, in her eyes, Jinwan was just a small character. When she was happy, she would hold her arm as her roommate. When she was unhappy, she could casually poke at her. However, every time, Bai Wei and Feng Ling would speak up to defend her. If it was only Feng Ling who defended Jinwan, they might have suspected something. However, even Bai Wei always stood by Jinwan's side. Ling Feifei could not find fault with them, and could only tease them from time to time. She then smiled and said that she was only joking. Right now, if it weren't for the fact that Jinwan did not take Ling Feifei seriously, and did not care about them at all, with her original temper, she would definitely make Ling Feifei cry and go home to find her parents. Since it was not important, she could not be bothered with it. In any case, she was indeed a spoiled rich young lady. A week later on Saturday, it was Jinwan's turn to treat. Ling Feifei sat in the dormitory room and suddenly asked, "What are we eating this week?" The other three people in the dormitory had almost forgotten about this agreement. After all, it was only a meal. Who would really need to remember the rules? Ling Feifei turned to look at Jinwan. "Jinwan, it's your turn to treat today." It did not matter to her whether she was treating or not. Jinwan did not care about such things. However, it had been more than a week since she communicated with Mo Jingshan. They did not even exchange a single phone call. Right now, she did not appear to have changed much, but her heart was actually heavy. She could not muster up any other interest. "What do you want to eat?" she casually asked. "I've already tasted the skills of the Michelin star chef from the Italian restaurant. I've also tried the most famous sushi restaurant in T City. How about we eat seafood this week? Previously, I saw on the internet that many of the oysters shipped from overseas are of superb quality. They're big and delicious. Let's go eat a seafood feast." "You're really demanding an exorbitant price," Bai Wei mocked from the side. "Don't tell me you're tempted by the seafood restaurant you heard about a few days ago? You've always wanted Jinwan to treat us there?" Ling Feifei ignored her, continuing on her own. "It's the one I heard about previously. How about we go there to eat?" Jinwan calmly glanced at her. "Up to you." That seafood restaurant's prices were indeed not low, for the four of them to eat together. And it was a seafood feast that Ling Feifei had specially ordered. It would cost at least 10,000 yuan. Although none of the people in this dormitory lacked money, Ling Feifei did not live the life of a commoner. She never ate anything that cost tens or hundreds of yuan. Whenever she went out, she would either eat a palace-set meal or eat expensive, flashy, but impractical luxurious food. Jinwan knew that when she was once so arrogant, she was only spoiled when dealing with people. She had not spoiled herself to this extent. Seeing that Jinwan had no objections, Bai Wei spread out her hands. "You guys decide. I'm fine with anything." Feng Ling did not speak, but did not reject. In the end, the few of them went to the seafood restaurant that Ling Feifei insisted on eating at. The moment they sat down, they originally agreed to order a seafood feast. However, after ordering, Ling Feifei said that she did not feel like there was a main course, and that seafood was not enough. She tugged the waiter over and ordered many other dishes. That's enough. This is enough for us. How much can a few women eat? Do you still want to order? Bai Wei said. I already said that I want to eat oysters. Although this restaurant's oysters are expensive, they were all flown in from overseas. They're especially fresh. It's rare for us to come here, so we have to eat our fill. Ling Feifei ignored her and continued to order what she wanted. Jin Wan placed her phone on the table and only occasionally chatted with Bai Wei. Her gaze occasionally shifted to the phone that had remained silent for more than a week. Occasionally, she would retract her gaze and look toward Ling Feifei, who was seated opposite her, still talking to the waitress. After ordering, all the food was served. Bai Wei could not help but complain when she saw that aside from the set meal, there were so many dishes. You ordered so much. If you have the ability, eat them all. Aren't there 4 of us? Besides, Feng Ling practices martial arts. You must eat a lot, right? Ling Feifei turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling did not even raise her eyelids. She coldly said, I'm allergic to seafood. You guys eat. I'll just order a bowl of noodles. Chapter 214. Bai Wei immediately mocked. She glanced at the embarrassed Ling Feifei. Remember to finish it all. If there's too much left, it'll be too much. Anyone could tell that she was trying to trick Jin Wan. She clearly could not finish it, yet she still ordered so much. In the end, she really could not finish it. Not to mention the extra dishes. Even the seafood feast set meal was only half eaten. Bai Wei watched Ling Feifei mockingly the entire time. Ling Feifei coughed but did not speak. Are you all full? As the one treating today, Jin Wan did not eat much. After taking a sip of fruit juice, she calmly asked, I'm full but there's so much left. What a waste, Bai Wei said. It's fine. Seafood isn't suitable for takeaway. There's nothing we can do about the leftovers, Jin Wan calmly said. She stood up to pay the bill. As expected, Ling Feifei did not have any good intentions. The dishes she ordered later on were all more expensive than anything else in the set meal. Who could imagine that 4 women with small appetites would spend more than 20,000 yuan on a meal in a seafood restaurant? Even someone like Mo Jingshan, with his wealth, would not exaggerate to such an extent. Whenever he brought Jin Wan out to eat, he would only choose what she liked. He did not care about the price. Even if it was tens, hundreds, or even thousands of yuan, it was fine as long as it was clean and tasty. Today, Jin Wan had truly broadened her horizons. However, no matter how expensive this seafood restaurant was, it could not possibly have such a price. In the end, it was only because Ling Feifei had ordered the most expensive dishes that it exceeded 20,000 yuan. Jin Wan first went to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw that Ling Feifei had come out. Seeing that Jin Wan did not immediately pay the bill, Ling Feifei said in amusement, It seems like you really ordered quite a lot today. It should be quite a lot, right? Did you bring enough money? Do you have enough left on your card? Jin Wan glanced at her. Before you ordered, you didn't even consider if I had enough money. Are you planning to pay for me now? Ling Feifei immediately smiled mockingly. We agreed that you'll be treating today. I've already treated you. How can I treat you again? If you really can't afford it, you can discuss it with the owner of the restaurant and see if you can pay on credit. After speaking, Ling Feifei smiled as she picked up her bag and headed to the door to wait. Clearly, she did not plan on standing with Jin Wan. She did not want to embarrass herself if Jin Wan really wanted to buy on credit. Bai Wei, who had also walked out from behind, heard their conversation and approached to ask, Jin Wan, do you really have enough money? Jin Wan smiled. Don't worry. Wait for me outside. Bai Wei wanted to offer to help Jin Wan pay for it, but seeing from Jin Wan's expression that she did not need their help, she did not ask further. She only glanced at her with concern. The waiter at the counter heard their conversation and looked at Jin Wan suspiciously. Miss, do you really want to pay on credit? We don't accept credit here. If you don't have money, you can ask your friend to pay for it. The waiter had yet to finish his words when Jin Wan casually placed the card on the counter to cover his mouth. In truth, 20,000 yuan was not much. However, Ling Feifei's earlier mockery had caused the waiter to think that Jinwan really did not have much money. In the end, when he saw the gold card she had taken out, he recognized that it was impossible to obtain this type of card without a deposit of 5 million yuan. He did not dare to speak further, and nimbly swiped the card to settle the bill. Jinwan initially planned to take out the black card that Mo Jingshan had given her. Usually, she was used to using this card. However, right now, she still took out the card that belonged to her, that was placed below the black card. After settling the bill, Feng Ling walked over and glanced at her. People like Ling Feifei should find time to cover her head with a gunny sack and throw her into a corner to give her a good beating. Otherwise, she'll forever treat her stupidity as innocence and not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Jinwan curved her lips into a smile. I won't stop you if you want to beat her up, but it's best if you wait until after my classes are over. Back then, Professor Lin repeatedly reminded me not to be too calculative with these hedonistic young masters. If it weren't for Professor Lin's warning, I would have already made Ling Feifei regret staying in the same dormitory as me on the first day. Jinwan would never suffer such grievances. Her methods were not simple. Feng Ling knew this as well. Thus, when she saw how flexible Jinwan was recently, she really suspected that Jinwan's emotions had been affected by her relationship with Mo Jingshan. She actually allowed such a small character to jump around in front of her. As they walked out of the seafood restaurant, Ling Feifei was not surprised that Jinwan had paid the bill. She thought that Bai Wei and Feng Ling must have helped her pay quite a bit. She continued walking out with her head held high. That aura made it seem as though the three following behind her were her little attendants. Before returning to T University, they passed by a large department store. There was a custom-made gown shop downstairs. Ling Feifei suddenly said, "That's right, before we graduate. It seems like we'll be able to make it to T University's 100-year anniversary. Have you guys prepared the gowns?" Bai Wei calmly replied, "There's still 2 months before the anniversary. What's the rush? Since there's a shop here, let's go in and take a look." Ling Feifei took the initiative and walked in. Feng Ling had already lost her patience with this rich young lady. She frowned as she stood outside the door. However, since they came out together, and there was still some distance from T University, they still entered. Women naturally had no resistance to gowns. Initially, Bai Wei did not want to look, but after entering, she discovered that the gowns here were indeed not bad. Thus, she walked in with Ling Feifei. A staff member poured several cups of water and placed them on the coffee table in front of the sofa. Feng Ling sat on the sofa and did not leave. Bai Wei and Ling Feifei went to another high-end gown viewing area. Jinwan sat on the sofa and glanced out the window. When she saw a black ghost speeding by, her gaze faltered. However, that ghost was not a limited edition model. The license plate was also not one she was familiar with. It was merely a ghost brand, and there were many similar cars in this city. However, the one she was most familiar with would never appear in this city. Jinwan took a sip of water and placed the cup down. She stood up and said, "I'm going to walk around." Feng Ling glanced at her and subconsciously wanted to follow her. However, when she saw that Jinwan was only casually walking around the shop, she gave up on following and continued to sit on the sofa without moving. This shop could be considered T-City's flagship store for custom-made gowns. The designs of the gowns were all extraordinary, and the prices were not low. Jinwan walked in front of several fixed models. She saw a gown that was meticulously made of silver thread, and raised her hand to gently touch the silver thread. Chapter 215. Due to the Ji family's status in High City, be it in terms of wealth or power, they were all considered high class. Although Jinwan showed off her abilities in the upper class, she had always believed in one principle. When she was outside, or in front of people who did not understand her, the best way to protect herself was to not expose her wealth. After coming to T-City, she did not wish to bicker with these kinds of people too much. Another reason was to seek peace and quiet, preventing others from inquiring about all sorts of things. However, at this moment, Her hand had only just touched the corner of the silver-threaded gown. When an employee by the side heard Ling Feifei's words, she subconsciously reached out and forcefully pushed Jin Wan's hand away. Jin Wan looked at this gown, that was not considered high-end in her eyes. She then expressionlessly turned toward the employee. This gown is worn by a model. Isn't it placed here for the customer to see? If it can't be touched, why place it here? There's no touching sign on it. Who gave you the right to push away a customer? Your guts aren't small. The employees in this gown store had all gone through a series of professional training. This employee had truly been rash earlier. The moment she met Jin Wan's cold gaze, she immediately regretted her actions. But being scolded in front of everyone, the shop assistant was still a little displeased. She said, "Miss, this is the treasure of our shop. The price is at least $1 million. The one you touched just now is also the most expensive one in this series. Of course, you can't touch it carelessly. If you break it or dirty it, you really can't afford to pay for it. This is an annual fashion show in Paris, France. It was just sent over from France and was only placed here this morning. We haven't had the time to put up the no touching sign." The employee's confidence naturally stemmed from Ling Feifei's words earlier. She was certain that Jin Wan, who was dressed simply, would not be able to afford it. When Ling Feifei heard these words, she immediately approached. She looked curiously at the silver-threaded gown and could not help but reach out to touch it. "This one is indeed very beautiful. Can I try it on?" The shop assistant, who had just said that they did not have time to hang up the no touching sign, saw Ling Feifei's actions and did not stop her. Instead, she smiled even more cheerfully and said, "Yes, miss, please proceed to the VIP changing room inside. Our shop assistant will help you try it on." As he spoke, the employee no longer paid any attention to Jin Wan, who did not have the slightest sign of a famous brand. He eagerly pulled the other employees along to serve this Miss Ling, who looked like a tycoon at first glance. Bai Wei coldly glanced in Ling Feifei's direction and walked to Jin Wan's side to comfort her. "This young miss is probably born with her eyes on the top of her head. She's asking us to accompany her for a meal and to shop with her just to flaunt her wealth and let us see her illustrious family background. Ignore her." At this time, Jin Wan glanced at Feng Ling, who was looking at her. Feng Ling sat on the sofa and looked at her teasingly, as if saying, "You can even tolerate this? That gown earlier, what do you think of it?" Jin Wan calmly withdrew her gaze, turning to look at Bai Wei by her side. Bai Wei raised her brows. "It's all right. It's indeed beautiful, but it's a little expensive. However, if it's a new model from the Paris fashion show, it's definitely worth the price. Do you plan on attending the 100th anniversary?" Jin Wan asked. "If time permits, I'll attend. It's rare for me to have a few months of time to return to my student days after entering the workforce. Back then, I didn't have the chance to attend such a 100th anniversary event. This time, I'll just treat it as a perfect ending to my pitifully simple student days." Bai Wei spoke with a smile. She looked at Jin Wan. "What about you?" Jin Wan did not reply. She calmly glanced at the other gowns around her and calmly said, "Speaking of which, that gown earlier is quite suitable for you. That gown is more mature and elegant. Ling Feifei's figure is too petite, and her aura is unable to support that gown. If you wear it, you'll definitely be stunning." Bai Wei heard these words and immediately chuckled. "Forget it. It's just a school anniversary. It's enough for me to dress appropriately and generously. Even if I become an executive in a foreign company, my annual salary would only be a few million. There's no need to spend so much money on a beauty contest. It's obvious that Ling Feifei has been spoiled rotten by her family. We're definitely not people from the same world as her." The two of them casually chatted, from the gown to the school anniversary, and from the school anniversary to Professor Lin's teaching methods. Not long later, Ling Feifei came out wearing the gown. It was as Jin Wan had said. Ling Feifei's figure was on the smaller side and could not support the elegance of this gown at all. Although she had purposely found a pair of 10-centimeter high heels to wear, making her appear taller, she was still unable to support it. "How is it? Does it look good?" Ling Feifei stood in front of them and turned around proudly. I plan to buy this one. Bai Wei smiled but did not speak. She did not say that it looked good, nor did she say that it did not look good. Jinwan only raised her brows. She did not speak, but her gaze spoke volumes. In truth, her attitude was the same as Bai Wei's. It was just that she clearly did not feel that it was good. She was just too lazy to say anything. However, the employee who had pushed Jinwan earlier intentionally observed Jinwan's expression. Ling Feifei also intentionally looked toward Jinwan when the employee suddenly spoke up. Miss Ling, it's best if you don't ask them. Some people are born to be envious of others. There's no meaning in asking like this. Right now, some people's expressions are clearly saying that the grapes are sour. They definitely won't say that it looks good. That's right, that's right. The other employee, in order to quickly sell this most expensive gown and earn a generous salary, also chimed in. You can't afford it yourself, but you don't want others to buy it? What kind of gaze is that? It's as though Miss Ling's beautiful gown has pierced your eyes. Miss Ling, what kind of friends do you have? They're just roommates. They can't be considered friends. Ling Feifei stood there with a pleased expression, allowing the two employees to praise her as they pleased. She spun around twice and said, This gown is indeed not bad. Are there any other styles? If you really like it, buy it, Jinwan said indifferently. Let's go take a look at the other floors of the department store. Call us when you're done. After speaking, Jinwan and Bai Wei exchanged glances and turned to leave. Chapter 216. She truly could not stand Jinwan's nonchalant attitude, even though she clearly had no money. She directly mocked and ridiculed her. Jinwan's footsteps paused. She abruptly shifted her gaze to the arrogant shop assistant from the corner of her eyes. Feng Ling had already stood up. Earlier, she was preparing to head out with her. Right now, her gaze was playful as she watched Jinwan. She then glanced at the reckless shop assistant and felt that a good show was about to begin. Finally, Jinwan abruptly turned around and coldly glanced at the shop assistant behind her. Where's your shop manager? Why are you looking for the manager? The shop assistant did not seem to be afraid of her reporting them. She continued to sneer and say, Our manager isn't here to serve idlers like you. What can you do even if you call the manager over? However, due to Jinwan's request to see the manager, the shop manager, who was originally watching the commotion from the side, had no choice but to approach from the cashier. Miss, I'm sorry. May I ask what you need? The manager looked at her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. There was not a hint of respect for the customer in her eyes. Instead, because she had seen the entire situation, she knew that she did not have much ability and would not be able to cause any trouble. I have a complaint. Your shop's sales assistant has spoken rudely to the customer. First, she used her hands to push the customer. Now she is using her words to provoke the customer. Jinwan's face was expressionless. Her expression was exquisite and cold as she added. She even had the intention to compare the two customers who entered at the same time, elevating one and belittling the other. This kind of snobbish behavior is one more crime. The manager immediately laughed. Miss, it's not that I want to criticize you, but earlier, I saw everything with my own eyes. Our shop assistant didn't do anything. This gown is indeed not something anyone can touch. If you were like Miss Ling and could afford it, we naturally wouldn't say anything. However, you clearly can't afford it, yet you insisted on touching it. The shop assistant was afraid that you would dirty it and ruin it, so she subconsciously pushed you. She didn't hit it hard, so why do you have to be so calculative? Besides, our shop assistant's judgment of people isn't wrong. Miss, there's nothing eye-catching on you. With one look, I can tell that you're just an ordinary student. You want to hug Miss Ling's thigh and accompany her to shop, but you have to be clear about your own status. You don't even have the right to touch something that she can try on. This is life. You don't have her money or power, so you're destined to be divided. What do you have to be unhappy about? As the manager spoke, she examined Jinwan from head to toe. She estimated the price of her clothes, shoes, bag, and other items. She could not see the logo, and could only see that they were from a few international brands of them. However, they were not. Miss could tell that the brand of them, of her, of them, of not there, of them, of Ling, but they were not. Could it be that everyone in this shop is snobbish? Bai Wei could not stand it any longer. She coldly reprimanded while frowning by Jinwan's side. However, Jinwan only smiled mildly. She reached out to block Bai Wei, who was about to stand up for her. At the same time, she picked up her phone and turned to make a call. The employees and managers, including Ling Feifei, who was about to change out of that gown to try on other gowns, all looked toward Jinwan as though they were watching a show. Call her? Who could she call? Could it be that because she was too poor to afford a gown, she was going to angrily call the police like a junior high school student after being ridiculed by the employees? Even the Bureau of Industry and Commerce could not do anything about this, much less the police. How ignorant and childish. The employees sneered, fighting to change into Ling Feifei's gown. After Ling Feifei changed into another gown and came out, the employees carefully tidied up the most expensive silver gown in the store and put it on the model. In a short 10 minutes, the employees surrounded Ling Feifei, one after another, trying to persuade her to buy a gown here today. At this moment, the manager in the store suddenly saw the figures of several people in charge of the department store appear by the door. She looked at the several big shots dressed in suits with solemn expressions. Seeing them suddenly push open the door, the manager was surprised and rushed forward to welcome them. CEO Chen? CEO Zhang? Why do you have the time to personally patrol the store? Is the department store going to start a fire inspection again? Or is there some big shot coming to patrol the department store? If there's any situation, you could have just given us a call. How could we trouble the two of you to personally come? The manager walked over with a face full of smiles. But for some reason, her heart began to beat like a drum. This department store was the center of High City's G Corporation's chain department store in the country. It was also the largest G Corporation department store in the country aside from High City. Usually, these managers and directors would never personally come to patrol the employees. These were all big shots who sat high up in the department store's air-conditioned office. Today, they all appeared at the same time. The manager subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Otherwise, she would not have been able to invite them even if she wanted to. Seeing that the manager had already gone forward to welcome them, and seeing that it really was CEO Chen and CEO Zhang, the employees subconsciously rushed over to welcome them. Their faces were full of smiles as they welcomed them politely. In an instant, Ling Feifei, who was originally surrounded by a group of people, was suddenly left alone. Ling Feifei had just put on the second gown. It had a zipper at the back, but the zipper was only half pulled up. She angrily called for them to come back and help her pull it up, but after calling out twice, no one paid her any attention. CEO Chen and CEO Zhang were the direct managers of this department store. They were also the managers of High City's G Corporation and were the general manager and director of this department store. Normally, they did not have the opportunity to meet them. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were their immediate superiors. The other person who walked in after them was the brand manager of this VIP gown store. He was the person who could decide the life and death of all the employees in this store. CEO Chen, CEO Zhang Yu. The manager saw that they walked in with straight faces and did not even glance at them. Her unease grew. Thinking back to the phone call she had made earlier, the manager subconsciously glanced in Jinwan's direction. There were so many important people here. It couldn't be that they were really called here by her phone call, right? From Miss Ling's attitude, it was unlikely that she had such an ability. But for these immediate superiors to suddenly come personally, it could not be a coincidence. However, under the shocked gazes of everyone in the store, these immediate superiors suddenly approached Jinwan. Chapter 217. When the people in the store heard these words, their legs immediately softened. What Miss G? The employee who had pushed Jinwan earlier also looked toward the expressionless Jinwan with a dumbfounded expression. Even Ling Feifei, who was struggling with the zipper of her gown, abruptly raised her eyes in shock. Wasn't Jinwan just the person in charge of a small studio? Why was the boss of a chain department store under the G Corporation treating her like a little eunuch seeing the Empress Dowager? CEO Chen and CEO Zhang eagerly handed their name cards over to Jinwan. Miss G, we are the people in charge of this department store. If you have any problems in T-City that you need our help with, you can contact us at any time. Our phones will definitely be on for you 24 hours a day. Facing these two, Jinwan did not smile politely. Instead, she mildly glanced at the name cards they handed over. Her expression was cold and emotionless as she said, "Deal with the problems in your department store first." Her actions of not giving them any face not only did not cause CEO Chen and CEO Zhang to be unhappy, it even caused the two who were usually high and mighty to nod their heads repeatedly. They all agreed, "Yes, yes, yes. All right. We'll deal with it immediately." Who would dare to slight the G Corporation's true heiress with her presence? This entire department store belonged to their G family. "Miss G, please take a seat. Please take a seat first. Leave this to us." CEO Chen respectfully invited Jinwan to sit on the sofa by the side. He then indicated for the employee to bring some drinks over. Although the employee did not know the identity of this so-called Miss G, she was so frightened that she immediately poured a cup of coffee and brought it over. Feng Ling stood by the side, the corners of her lips seemingly curving up. Although Bai Wei was surprised, she also felt that the student that Professor Lin accepted was definitely not simple. Perhaps Jinwan was usually too low profile. However, on Ling Feifei's side, there was a sudden gotcha sound. The zipper on the back of her gown was abruptly torn due to her clenching her teeth and pulling it with great force. Jinwan held onto the coffee cup, lowering her head to slowly blow at the steam wafting out. Through the thick white fog, she could see the various expressions on Ling Feifei's and the employees' faces. She also saw Ling Feifei standing awkwardly because her zipper was damaged. She glared at her with an ugly expression. However, because she was unsure of Jinwan's identity, she did not know where to place her complicated gaze. Then, Jinwan exchanged a look with the supervisor, who had already sensed that something was wrong and turned pale. The moment she met Jinwan's gaze, the supervisor's back stiffened. She wanted to ask CEO Chen and CEO Zhang who exactly she was, but just as she was about to speak, she suddenly received CEO Chen and CEO Zhang's glare. She was so frightened that her legs turned numb. "You again?" Director Zhang suddenly reprimanded the supervisor. "We received a report last time saying that the gowns in your shop are not in line with the brand's standard price. You even said that the manager of your store was too arrogant, so angry that some customers directly reported you to the higher-ups. You were the one who went to our office to write a letter of self-reflection and a letter of guarantee, promising to rectify the demeanor of the employees in the future and to cooperate with the change in the prices of the brands. It's only been 2 months, and your store is actually in trouble again." The supervisor's complexion was ashen. She wanted to explain, but was scolded back down by CEO Chen. By the side, the brand manager also reprimanded the supervisor and the employees. At the same time, he put on a fawning expression, trying to salvage their brand's image. He did not want these small characters to cause their brand to be removed from this large department store. However, the result was that this store was about to be closed down due to damaging the image of the department store. The G Corporation department store would no longer cooperate with this French luxury gown brand. They were ordered to clear away all the goods within 2 days, vacate the store, and never renew the contract or cooperate with them. They never expected that it would cause such a serious consequence. The supervisor and the employees who were about to lose their jobs also faced the consequences of having their wages deducted and being fined. Even the brand manager, who had followed them here, panicked. They knew that the problem lay with Jinwan and wanted to plead for her. However, Jinwan only sat quietly on the sofa, not even glancing at them. The brand manager was responsible for the image and marketing management of this French luxury gown brand in the entire province. Seeing that the largest department store in T-City was about to remove their brand, he angrily scolded the supervisor and the others. "What are you waiting for? You've affected our brand's image and caused such a terrible consequence. Do you think deducting our wages can solve the problem? If there's no way to salvage the situation, the brand's legal staff will come to you within 3 days. Because of your stupid behavior, it has led to such a serious consequence. If the brand's legal department doesn't sue you until you go bankrupt, you won't be able to report back. A bunch of idiots. Hurry up and apologize to Miss G. Think of a way to plead for her. Salvage the brand's loss. Hearing that not only would they be fined, but they would also be sued by the brand's legal staff, the supervisor and employees, who were already tense, rushed to Jin Wan's side in fright, apologizing profusely. At this moment, the supervisor and employees' attitudes were so servile that they wished they could directly kneel down. The supervisor was the first to step forward to hold Jin Wan's hand, wanting to put herself in her shoes and plead for leniency. Just as the supervisor's hand was about to touch Jin Wan's arm, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked over a pot of boiling water on the coffee table. The boiling water splashed onto the supervisor's arm, causing her to cry out in pain. She took a large step back, staring in fear at Jin Wan, who remained seated quietly on the sofa with a calm attitude. Seeing this scene, Bai Wei, who was standing by the side, finally realized that Feng Ling's relationship with Jin Wan was not shallow. No wonder she had always felt that someone like Feng Ling was always protecting Jin Wan. From the looks of it, Jin Wan's identity was indeed extraordinary. Even though she was not clear of Jin Wan's identity, she suddenly had a premonition that Ling Feifei's fate would not be good in the future. After the supervisor was scalded, she took several steps back in a panic. Several employees also approached to plead for leniency. Feng Ling's expression was cold, as she was about to stop them from approaching Jin Wan. All of a sudden, CEO Chen and CEO Zhang could no longer watch on. They walked over and berated, "What are you all standing here for? There's no way Miss G will listen to your nonsense. Look for the brand's manager and legal staff to resolve the matter." The mall's security guards were sent over to pull away the employees who were kneeling and begging for mercy, to prevent them from disturbing Jin Wan. Chapter 218. That's right, that gown. Jin Wan pointed at the silver gown that the model was wearing. "Before your brand leaves this mall, sell this gown to me. How much is it?" The manager and the employees stared at her in shock. They then watched as Jin Wan took out a gold card and handed it to CEO Zhang. "I want that gown. Help me wrap it up." "Thank you. Be careful not to wrinkle it." She actually asked CEO Zhang to run an errand for her. However, CEO Zhang appeared as though he had received a reward. He immediately ordered for the gown Jin Wan wanted to be carefully removed from the model's body. He then ordered for the gown to be wrapped up and delivered to her. "Miss G, the bill for this gown can be transferred to our mall. You don't have to pay." CEO Zhang returned and placed the card in Jin Wan's hand. Jin Wan calmly glanced at CEO Zhang. She gave him face and accepted the card and the gown. However, in the blink of an eye, she handed the gown to Bai Wei, who was behind her. "Sister Bai Wei, this gown suits your skin and aura. It's for you." Jin Wan's attitude was courteous and matter-of-factly. In an instant, not only was Bai Wei shocked, the others present all had different expressions. Ling Feifei stood by the door. She almost crushed her teeth from gritting them. She was clearly the one who tried on this gown first. She was the one who saw it first. But Jin Wan actually bought it. She even gifted it to Bai Wei right in front of her. Jin Wan must be doing this on purpose. After the mall and the store's problems were settled, CEO Chen and CEO Zhang came to ask if Jin Wan had anything else to say. Jin Wan simply said a few words and left. She did not wish to stay here and deal with these people. The weekend wasn't a good time to be wasted here. Seeing that Jin Wan and the others had left, Ling Feifei was afraid that these people would pursue the matter of the zipper. Since there was a problem with the store, no one would think of her for now. Ling Feifei took advantage of the chaos to run out and catch up to them. "Jin Wan, stop right there." Ling Feifei followed behind and called out. She then quickly walked over. When she arrived before Jin Wan, she looked her up and down several times. She glared at her unhappily and asked, "Who exactly are you? How can the person in charge of a small studio invite the general manager and director of such a big shopping mall? Jinwan looked straight at her. Her indifferent gaze was focused on the carefully concealed unwillingness and embarrassment on Ling Feifei's face. She calmly said, "It's just studying at T University for 3 months. Is status and family background really that important? Are you sure you want to know the reason? Why don't you rank your roommates as well?" Ling Feifei was momentarily speechless. She could only glare at her in secret. "But it's wrong of you to lie." Jinwan could not be bothered to talk nonsense with her. She frowned and said, "Do you still want to see the gown? If you don't want to watch, then go back. I'm tired. The wind is really strong today. It's indeed not good weather for shopping. If you want to continue shopping, you can do so on your own. We'll return to T University first," Bai Wei added. Ling Feifei abruptly turned to look at Bai Wei, and then at the gown in her hands, that was worth more than 1,000,000 yuan. Even now, she did not dare to imagine that a gown worth more than 1,000,000 yuan would be so generously gifted to Bai Wei. "Jinwan," Ling Feifei suddenly angrily said, "your surname is Ji. That department store earlier belongs to Haicheng's Ji Group. Don't tell me you have some relationship with the Ji family?" Jinwan calmly glanced at her and did not speak. She was about to flag a taxi to return to T University. Ling Feifei continued, "You're a relative of the Ji family? You were able to open a studio in Haicheng. Don't tell me it's because you're hugging onto the Ji family's thigh? Otherwise, how could there be a place for you in a place like Haicheng where every inch of land is worth its weight in gold?" Feng Ling could no longer watch on. She rubbed her brows by the side. She was really an idiot who deserved a beating. That night, Bai Wei and Jinwan headed to the bathroom in the dormitory to shower. When they came out to change, they encountered each other in the changing room. Bai Wei asked as she changed, "Jinwan, you're the daughter of Haicheng's Ji family, aren't you?" Jinwan's actions did not change. She then picked up the hairdryer and turned to look at her. She smiled slightly and used a voice that only she could hear to say, "You can see through it, but don't say it out loud." As expected, it was clear that Jinwan was just trying to keep a low profile. Ling Feifei refused to believe that Jinwan's family background was good, and would rather believe what she believed. She blindly placed the words Jinwan's small studio together. But if she thought about it carefully, Jinwan should be the young miss of the Ji Corporation. Hearing the words "you can see through it, but don't say it out loud," Bai Wei, who had been in the workplace for many years, instantly understood and nodded. It was the weekend. It was already the 3rd week after Jinwan's birthday. T University's business management classes were almost halfway through. Previously, Jinwan had brought all of her luggage to the dormitory. However, she had left a power adapter for her laptop in the condo's study. She had forgotten to bring it along. After using the computer last night, Jinwan searched for it for a long time, and recalled that she had left it in the condo. Taking advantage of the weekend, she returned with Feng Ling to retrieve it. By the time they reached the condo, it was already evening. All the floors of the condo were already lit up. "Mrs. M.O." Feng Ling walked behind Jinwan and softly said, "I previously contacted Shenmu. He said that Mr. M.O. was in Japan for a business trip last week, and should have returned in the past 2 days. You and Mr. M.O. haven't contacted each other for almost a month. Are you not planning to take the initiative to give him a call?" Jinwan's footsteps paused. If Feng Ling had not told her, she would not have known that Mo Jingshan was in Japan last week. After so long, Jinwan had grown too accustomed to being by Mo Jingshan's side. Habit was a scary thing. It was so scary that she thought Mo Jingshan would always be by her side. However, it was only today that she realized that if one day, Mo Jingshan did not want her anymore, or if Mo Jingshan chose to disappear from her life, she would not be able to find him. That man's position was too high. As long as he was willing, he could be very, very close to her. If he was unwilling, he could be very, very far away. Jinwan did not speak and directly entered the condo. When she reached her floor and stepped out of the elevator, she was shocked to find that the door to her condo was actually open. Warm light seeped out from the half-closed door. Feng Ling's face lit up. She was about to ask if Mr. Mo had come when Jinwan, who had been pretending to be calm, opened the door and quickly walked in. Dash. Chapter 219. Jinwan pushed open the door and entered, looking at the bright lights in the living room. Feng Ling hesitated outside the door. Since Mr. Emo was here, did it mean that she didn't have to accompany Jinwan tonight? After hesitating for a moment, she decided not to go in. This apartment was really big. The distance from the door to the bedroom was not close, but the bedroom door was closed, and there was no light inside. Aside from the living room, only the kitchen light was on. Why was it the kitchen? Would Emo Jingshan really come? Jinwan felt an inexplicable feeling of homesickness. She had already prepared a lot of things to say. She wanted to say that she had always believed in him. When she said those words, it wasn't because she doubted their relationship and marriage. She was just stuck there for a moment. She directly said what she wanted to say, but she ignored the trust between them that had always existed. These days she stared at her phone in a daze every day. Her hand always paused on the call button, but she could not press it. Had he finally calmed down? Had he finally come? Jinwan stood outside the kitchen for a while. She wanted to go in, but was afraid that it would be too sudden. She prepared a plan in her mind before stepping in. However, the moment she entered the kitchen, she saw an auntie in her 50s standing by the refrigerator, holding a shopping bag with a supermarket logo in one hand and opening the refrigerator door with the other. Jinwan's footsteps paused, and the glimmer of hope in her eyes immediately dissipated. Her hands hidden in her sleeves clenched tightly, and then loosened, as though there was something she wanted to hold but could not. The auntie in front of the refrigerator heard footsteps and turned back to see Jinwan. She was surprised and then asked eagerly and kindly, "Hello, are you Miss Ji?" Jinwan restrained her emotions and said, "Yes, and you are?" The auntie immediately smiled again. "Hello, Miss Ji. I'm Mr. Mo's private nanny hired more than a month ago. I'm responsible for cleaning your room every 2 days and changing all the ingredients in the kitchen to the freshest every day. I noticed that the things in the refrigerator have not been touched for a long time, and you haven't used the various ingredients bought in the past month. After all, Mr. Emo has paid for them long ago, so I still come on time every 2 days." Feng Ling heard the conversation inside from the outside. She didn't hear Mr. Mo's voice and felt it was strange. Was the person inside not Mr. Emo? She quickly walked in and saw Jinwan standing in front of the kitchen door. She appeared normal, but her back was clearly tense. Feng Ling stepped forward hesitantly. When she raised her eyes to see the auntie inside, she instantly understood what was going on. No wonder this place is always clean. It turns out that people often come here to clean up. Feng Ling said in a low voice, and then turned to see that Jinwan was also smiling politely, but the smile did not reach her eyes. It was obvious that he was disappointed. "By the way, Miss Ji, I buy these things every 2 days. Are you not used to them? Or have you not been staying here recently? I see that many of the things in your bathroom have not been used in a long time." The auntie closed the fridge door and turned around to ask, "If you're not used to it, you can give me a list. In the future, I'll only buy what you like." "No, it's true that I haven't lived here for a long time." Jinwan's tone was flat, and she lowered her eyes to look at the clean and spotless floor. Oh, no wonder." The auntie nodded. "It's such a waste to keep the things you buy. If Miss G doesn't come to stay in the condominium, do you need me to send all the food I buy to T University in the future? Are you staying in the dormitory right now? It's not convenient to cook in the dormitory, and the food is also very casual. There's no need to go through so much trouble," Jinwan calmly said. "Auntie, in the future, just come here on time to clean up. There's no need to buy anything." "But Mr. Emo gave me a lot of money." "It's fine. I just need to clean up." "Miss G, then this money." Seeing that Jinwan was not in a good mood, Feng Ling directly spoke up. "Just do whatever Miss G says. If she says there's no need to buy, then there's no need to buy." The auntie was stunned. She had received so much money, but in the end, she only came to clean up. She truly felt uneasy. However, seeing that they insisted, she could only nod. All right then. I'll give you my phone number. In these 3 months, if you need anything, feel free to call me. Jinwan nodded and did not speak anymore. She turned to leave. Feng Ling received the note from the auntie. After glancing at the phone number, she allowed the auntie to continue cleaning. She then turned to look at Jinwan, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room. She was silent for a moment and was about to go over to speak to her. However, the auntie in the kitchen rarely saw someone here and kept trying to find a topic to talk about. Feng Ling stood where she was and casually replied. Half an hour later, the auntie left. Jinwan was still standing by the window. Mrs. Mo, you came back to get the computer accessories, right? Feng Ling spoke up to break the silence. Do you still remember where you left them? I'll go get them for you, lest you forget when you leave later. In the study. All right, I'll go get them. Feng Ling glanced at her again, before turning to head to the study. In the study, she found the things Jinwan wanted and walked out. At some point in time, Jinwan, who had been standing by the window, had already squatted down. Jinwan squatted by the window and did not make a single sound. Mo. Feng Ling was about to speak when she hesitated for 2 seconds because of the scene before her. She suddenly took out her phone and secretly took a photo of Jinwan from this angle. She took a photo of Jinwan's desolate appearance as she squatted by the window. From this angle, she could not see Jinwan's expression. She could only see a lock of hair hanging by her cheeks. Her back view was thin and quiet, like a child who had been abandoned by an adult by the side of the road. She did not know what to do. After taking the photo, Feng Ling stared at it for a moment and found Mo Jingshan's private number on her phone. She directly sent the photo to him. After sending it, only 2 seconds later, she saw the words read on the back of the photo. She then placed her phone back and walked to the window to accompany Jinwan as she squatted down. Mrs. Mo, what do you want to do the most right now? Jinwan heard Feng Ling's words and turned to look at the short-haired woman by her side. She pursed her lips. I don't know. My mind is a little empty. Perhaps I can listen to some stories, or do something to divert my attention and make myself feel better. Or drinking is not a bad choice. The ancients said that getting drunk can cure 1,000 sorrows. I can give it a try. This was the first time in a month that Jinwan had taken the initiative to admit the pain in her heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.